call this meeting. Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public. This is a meeting of the Albemarle County Planning Commission. I always say that to make sure you know you're in the right spot. The opportunities for the public to access and participate in the hybrid meeting are posted on the Albemarle County website, on the Planning Commission homepage, and on the Albemarle County calendar. Participation will include the opportunity to comment on those matters, which comments from the public will be received. And so with that, I would like to establish a quorum, and I'll ask if Madam Clerk could call the roll.
Yes. Mr. Murray,
Here.
Mr. Claiborne,
Here.
Mr. Missile,
Here.
Mr. Carazana,
Here.
Mr. Bivens,
Yes.
and Mr. Moore is joining remotely, and he's gonna give you his location.
Sure. Is Mr. Moore ready to speak?
I have him unmuted.
Okay. Commissioner Moore, can you hear us?
Can you hear us? Nathan, can you hear us?
He just lost everyone's audio.
And I see Miss Firehawk just arrived.
Yes.
Okay.
So too.
Not sure what's going on with Mr. Moore's volume, but he is unmuted, but I can't hear him either.
I'm here. Hi there. I'm sorry. I can't hear you all. I know my volume is okay.
Okay, here you go. You can read your statement, sir.
Sure. It's that I am attending remotely for we'll call it personal medical tonight from my home in Albemarle County.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Is there a motion from the floor to admit Commissioner Moore to the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right. Hearing none, Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Claiborne,
Aye.
Mr. Missile, Mr. Carazana,
Aye.
Mr. Bivens, Ms. Firehawk,
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, Mr. Moore doesn't vote on his own admission, but he has now been admitted.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll
Next
take it.
on the- Other matters not listed on the agenda from the public. I do have two individuals that would like to speak. I'll start with them, or not, I have three individuals who would like to speak. I will start with them, and if anyone else desires to speak, you can identify yourself and we'll call you up to the podium. First, I'll ask for Mr. Tom Olivier to come to the podium.
Good evening, I'm Tom Olivier, a resident of the Samuel Miller District. We live in demanding times, and the next 2 decades are on track to present us with new, more larger challenges. We need to develop and install our best innovative thinking in the new comprehensive plan so that it can provide guidance in the troubled and changing times that surely are ahead. Many of the ideas we need will come from intense dialogues in which key issues are critically examined. To this end, yesterday I emailed to you invitations to you, the planning commissioners, to meet with environmentalists and other members of the public. This meeting is proposed and sponsored by the Piedmont Group of the Sierra Club, the CIVO 100 Climate Alliance, and 350.org. We invited you to attend and share your personal thoughts on challenging issues in the comp plan update and engage in dialogue on these issues with members of the public. In case the invitation is lost from your inbox, I provided paper copies for you on the table this evening. 2 of you have responded already, and we thank you for that. We hope to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Neil Williamson.
Good evening. I'm Neil Williamson with the Free Enterprise Forum. Feels like we've been working on AC 44 for 3 years already. But I know we're only into the second year. And we're well into the second year because I've had a number of posts describing the capacity analysis that you received last May. One of the issues there is the planning horizon you're dealing with in the comprehensive plan. Albemarle County took the idea that AC 44 to focus on 44. That's your planning horizon. If you utilize the numbers that were provided in the capacity study for what's available in terms of residential units and multiply it by the loss between comprehensive plan and approved plan densities, which I think was 58%, you are short 1,000 units on the low end. You're short 3,000 units on the high end. That's your planning horizon, and I haven't heard that discussed. You're short. Now, you're not short until 44, or maybe 43, or maybe 42, but you're short. And if you're planning for 44, I'm hopeful that as you discuss the development areas that were set down during the Carter administration, that you look at 44 as compared to 79, and there's a big difference there. In addition, in your other topics tonight, I encourage you to be descriptive rather than prescriptive. Talk about the impacts. Talk about how you can do things in adaptive reuse in crossroads communities that would allow not to have to go to town for the dentist appointment. Those types of things are critically important to our rural character and to our rural lives. And that goes to simple things like an oil change. Should you have to drive 30 miles for an oil change? If you're looking through a lens of equity and climate change, how does forcing rural area residents to drive more work? Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Ms. Paula Bagley? Or, sorry, Beasley.
My name is Paula Beasley, and I live in the Samuel Miller district. Charlottesville and its growth area currently comprises 20,180 acres. The growth area being 3.5 times the size of Charlottesville. Even during these times of phenomenal growth, that is enough capacity estimated for the next 10 to 20 years. If that growth rate continues, why do we need it? What happens to the concept of sustainability and encouraging more growth, which will be the end result? All these proposals for expanding the growth areas, designating rural villages, rural crossroad communities, and expanding the uses in these areas, and at rural interstate exchanges. And these proposals will diminish resident input and voices as to what will occur in their communities. For decades, Albemarle County, the state, local, and landowner resources have been to preserve our rural areas. There has been enormous citizen participation in the 2015 comp plan redraft, which imposed an affirmative obligation on the county to preserve and protect our rural lands. Preservation enables the county to focus its resources on Charlottesville where they are needed. Rural communities provide for themselves. There is no need to designate additional rural villages or crossroad communities, and the communities don't want them. Two on the list for consideration are Keene and Esmont, whose residents total 149 and 519 respectively. Not enough to support services economically, and unnecessary when a commercial and industrial area provides these services nearly 10 miles to the north or 6 miles to the south in Scottsville. What we need is internet for communication and to expand our other options. Further, expansion of transportation options and more frequency, such as the Jaunt provides, will solve most of our needs. Preserving rural areas is consistent with and promotes the county's objectives, specifically its climate action, biodiversity, and other objectives. The forests, flora, fauna, open spaces, tree cover, and agricultural lands and wetlands provide carbon sequestration, cleanse our air and our water. Respectfully requests that you not expand the development areas or add rural villages, crossroad communities, or expanded uses there or at rural interstate exchanges, as those will only promote unbridled growth and sprawl. More than ever, preservation of our rural areas is needed now. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Before I move on, I'd like to ask, would anyone else like to speak from the public?
We do have one online that would like to speak.
Okay, just want to confirm here in person first. Seeing none, okay, we can move to online.
Okay, Ms. Hausman, please state your name and address. And if you're affiliated with a group or organization, when you start talking, your time starts then. You have 3 minutes. Ms. Hausman, can you please unmute?
Unmute. There we go. I'm terribly sorry. I live in the Whitehall district and I want to echo the
Okay,
comments.
you need to state your name and your address first, and then you can start speaking.
Okay, all right. Sandy Hausman, 5577 Hilltop Street in Crozet. I like that Albemarle County established development zones and put other areas off limits. And it worries me now that we're already talking about adjusting the boundaries of those areas. I think if you don't stick to your guns on this, we're going to have the sprawl that local government tried to avoid in establishing development zones in the first place. I think you have to insist that developers limit their projects to designated areas if that strategy is going to work. And I think it's the only way we're going to save what's special about Albemarle. I think you as public officials are not obliged to ensure that everyone who wants to live here can afford to do so. That might sound callous, but frankly, I think your obligation right now is to current residents and to the land we want you to protect. You know, if you start expanding the development areas, you'll have broken a contract with the people you represent, the people who bought into different parts of the county with certain expectations. And along those lines, I want to say that I don't think we have preserved sufficient open space within development areas, specifically Crozet. I live near Crozet Park and we're seeing deer and bears in places we didn't see them before. There's a buck living in my backyard. A doe just gave birth in the park. We have to make provision for wildlife and for recreation. So I would suggest that you recommend the county acquire more acreage in areas that are not earmarked for development. I know the costs of parkland maintenance are a concern, but I think that's something we'll take up in the future. I think the first thing we have to do is to ensure sufficient habitat for animals and sufficient space for passive and active recreation around areas where density will only increase. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have anyone else at this time.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. There are no items on our consent agenda, so with that, we'll move into the formal work session, and I'll turn it over to Mr. McDermott.
Yes, thank you. Kevin McDermott, the acting planning director here at Albemarle County. I just wanted to give a quick introduction to our work session tonight. I understand that Tori will be covering some of this, but I just wanted to kind of help set the stage before she begins. So tonight we'll be going over 4 very dense and important topics that in a way really set the direction for everything else we'll be talking about throughout the comp plan. We are asking for the Planning Commission's direction on these 4 topics because we are going to be going to the Board of Supervisors in about 1 month with these same things, and we want to be able to provide them with the thoughtful consideration that we can get from the Planning Commission members. What I want to just emphasize is that tonight these topics we're kind of looking at these from a higher level, and we're hoping that you can help us set the direction. These topics are going to kind of filter through all of our other topic areas that we'll be talking about, specifically over the next 2 or 3 months of this project, actually up until December, when we're getting into the goals and objectives. So tonight, what we're doing is trying to set the direction for how our team can get into the details of how the county might want to grow into the future. So I appreciate everyone's consideration on these areas, and what we're hoping is that you can provide that direction, and we will have a follow-up after this to get into the details. We have 3 planning commission meetings scheduled before the end of the year, where we're really going to get into the meat of how we grow. Tonight is really just setting that direction. So I just wanted to emphasize that going into this. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce Tori Kanellopoulos to go ahead and start presenting the topics.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And good evening, commissioners. My name is Tori Kanellopoulos, principal planner, also joined this evening by Kevin McDermott and Vlad Gavrilovic, principal planner with EPRPC, and Selena Kozart with Kozart Consulting, who will be facilitating this meeting and is a project consultant. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We'll be focused on these 4 planning toolkit topics as part of AC 44. And since you all received a very detailed staff report and packet, I will plan to briefly cover each topic and then leave most of the time for discussion and input. And I will pause after going through the first topic and let you all discuss, and we'll do the same for each topic. And now I'll turn it over to Selena to talk about the format and flow of the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me with you, and good evening, commissioners. What we're thinking about in terms of the meeting format and flow is that, just to keep in mind, even as Kevin said, that this is a work session for guidance, that there's no formal vote that's going to be taken tonight, but we do want to hear your direction, and so that the staff can present that to the board on September 6th. And so, that's kind of the timeline for this conversation that we're having today, that this input goes to the Board of Supervisors on September 6th. And there will be continued opportunities for input, even as Kevin said already. And we just want to hear, I think Kevin covered this already, but just to reemphasize it, that we need to hear your input for recommendations for these 4 topics during this meeting. And so my role here is to help us to move forward smoothly, to help facilitate conversation so that we can get to all 4 topics and do that in a relatively timely fashion while you still get a chance to discuss what direction you want to go. And then, so that's my task for this evening, and I'm hoping that we're able to get there, like I said, in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Selena. So based on what we've been hearing from the community and then the commission's review, the purpose of the work session is for the commission to give specific recommendations to the board and to staff on how to carry forward each of these topics into goals, objectives, and action steps. So we're asking for input on which options should be pursued for each of the topics, and that could be, the options as presented or an option with some minor changes. And more broadly, since these are all topics that are in the current comprehensive plan, we are asking if updates to the plan are needed or if the current recommendations should be carried forward with no or minimal changes. And as a reminder, the toolkit started as growth management options in phase 1, which were options for how the county could grow in the next 20 years. They are topics that could support the growth management policy with coordinated land use and transportation planning. They are also ways the AC 44 framework could be applied, and they are topics that cut across many plan chapters. This slide shows a workflow for the 4 phases of the AC 44 process, and we wanted to highlight how the 4 toolkit topics we are discussing this evening feed into the updated plan chapters, including the goals and objectives. They also help inform some of the upcoming discussions for fall engagement, including land use designations, neighborhood model principles, density calculation recommendations, and natural and cultural resources mapping. We will need updated goals and objectives for all plan chapters, including these toolkit topics, before we can move into phase 3. In the most recent round of engagement, which took place from late April through late July, the AC 44 team hosted 5 total open houses with about 86 total attendees. There were also 4 online questionnaires for each topic, and total responses ranged from 19 to 52 for each. Several working group members also hosted 4 meetings with about 40 total participants. And we wanted to recognize that the total number of respondents for this round of engagement was lower than the first round of phase 2, which could be in part because these topics are more detailed and complex. So we wanted to emphasize again, there are more opportunities for community input as we move along, once we have direction from the commission and board and can draft the relevant goals and objectives. And we did note there seems to be a significant number of visitors to the website who may have been interested and wanted to learn more, but did not provide their input through the questionnaires. And we did have a lot of very thoughtful discussions at the open houses and reading through the community chats, especially on transportation, housing, natural resource protection, community health, and building community resilience. So moving into the first topic for this evening. As a reminder, activity centers are locations in the development areas that either now or in the future have a mix of residential, business, and recreational uses, and have a higher intensity and concentration of uses than surrounding areas and underlying land uses. They should be walkable with a variety of destinations to walk to, with safe and accessible multimodal transportation options. They are similar to the current plan recommendations for designated centers. However, the activity centers use a more focused approach with fewer total centers and standardized center place types applied across the development areas. During engagement, we heard overall support for the activity centers concept, especially a mix of uses, housing choice, redevelopment, and safely being able to walk and bike. That barriers should be reduced for small businesses to start. There was concern a mix of uses may not always be feasible. Centers need quality amenities to balance the higher intensity of uses. More frequent and reliable transit is needed, and centers support having destinations to walk to. And we also wanted to note that at the Commission's April 25th meeting, the Commission shared comments related to infill development in the development areas, including that incentives are likely needed for infill as it can be more challenging than greenfield development, and that encouraging efficient use of the existing development areas is needed. And Commissioner Murray also described a density of services that should be paired with higher density development, such as transit, access to quality open space, and access to more amenities and businesses. The Commission also discussed the benefits of using the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transit's multimodal street typology guidelines, as these have been reviewed and supported by VDOT. So there are 2 options for this topic. And the first is to have no change to centers during AC 44. The currently identified 50 centers in the master plans would remain. And a future step could be updating the centers during each master plan update, which could also use the draft activity centers that have been started as a starting point. The second option is to update all of the center locations in the development areas during AC 44 using the activity center place types. Staff is recommending this option as this approach would give a consistent format and terminology for all centers across the development areas, could provide more focused direction for future projects and redevelopment, and would encourage efficient use of land in the development areas. Given the time it takes to update each master plan one at a time, this option would also provide consistent center types and multimodal transportation planning across the development areas during AC 44, with additional recommendations being developed during future master plan updates. Districts would be used to identify single-use areas of activity, such as employment centers. With this option, the next steps during AC 44 would be continuing to revise the activity centers and district place types and locations, and to draft multimodal street types and networks for centers using the Department of Rail and Public Transit guidelines and coordinating with VDOT. So we'll now turn it over to the Commission for discussion and questions on this first topic. And we're happy to take any comments, including on center locations, but did want to note that if the Commission recommends option 2, we will continue to share updated center maps for additional engagement and comments. So these don't have to be the final centers.
Thank you, Tori.
We're not going to be talking about the specifics of any one said proposed center area. That's not where you're trying to steer us.
If you have, kind of high level comments about any of the centers, that's great and we're happy to take them. But just wanted to note, these don't have to be the final ones. And our main question is, if you all recommend moving forward with the activity centers during AC 44.
We will have further opportunity to talk about the specific locations. Yes.
If I might add, with the commission's permission, I was just going to put some high-level summary points from your discussion, and feel free to correct me if I'm misrepresenting anything.
Thanks, Vlad. So as we move into the discussions for each one of the topics, you all have received 3 colored cards that we're hoping that we'll use as a first round to kind of get us started on the discussion. And these will be used as kind of a straw poll to kind of get a pulse of given the information that you've received already and Tori's summary that she just provided for us. You just kind of say, where are you in relation to the recommendation that has been offered by the staff? So for instance, for topic 1, option 2 has been recommended by the staff. So the question that I'll offer is, where are you in relation to that recommendation? Green means I'm in agreement with that recommendation. Yellow means I'm in agreement, but I have some comment or question about it. And red means I'm not in agreement with that recommendation. So we'll do that as a quick just kind of pulse, and then I will invite each of the commissioners to speak, just for a couple of minutes. We're thinking that we'd spend around 40 minutes per topic. So, what the invitation is for you to, if there's something that you want to add that's different from what has already been said, that you would add that, or if you just want to say, I agree with what's already been said, to do that. And we'll just kind of go around to each commissioner to hear your comments. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get that pulse? So again, the staff for topic 1 has recommended option 2. So if you are in agreement with that, you put up red. If you're in agreement but you have comments, would be yellow. Green would be the agreement. Green agreement. And yellow is comments and red is no agreement.
So then could it be like green is yes and yellow is like caution?
Yes, you can consider it that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, all right, well, but do we get comments with green?
Yeah, it's
Well,
yes and.
Okay, all right, then I'll switch my.
Yeah, and this is just to kind of see where
Yeah.
folks are, and you'll get a chance to actually vocalize what you think. This isn't a vote, it's just a place to start. So why don't
Well, I'm not, sorry, I'm not holding up a physically a sign, but I would hold up a green card if I had one.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for speaking up. And we're going to go around one at a time and give each person a chance to speak briefly about where they stand, what that represents for them. So Commissioner Firehawk, would you?
Sure. So I like the yes and comment or whatever. So I wrote little comments on my staff report. I just wanted to, so I agree with that, option 2. But I just wanted to make the caveat that we need to consider the proximity of existing commercial areas and not put centers in the center of neighborhoods adjacent to commercial areas already serving this function. So, sometimes we have this is the planning area, and there's a C in the middle of it, but like right next to it is a major commercial area. But we're supposed to pretend that everyone wants to go to the middle of this neighborhood when the major commercial area is a quarter mile away right here. So, I just want that caveat to be part of the review. And then there was also in the overview of option 2, it talked about updating them, but I wanted to make the additional comment that we already have, I believe, way too many centers. There's Cs everywhere, awash in Cs. So I still think that the number of centers overall that were designated should be reduced, even if we choose option 2.
Could I just ask you, on your first point, not have them where they're what?
Where the study area is already adjacent to a major commercial center. we don't then also need another center in the middle of the neighborhood.
So don't add an activity center where you already have a commercial
Right, where
center.
everyone's already in the habit of going to this spot, we shouldn't try to artificially make a center in the middle. I think the other commissioners know what I mean.
If you're a few miles away from a larger center, a town, then do you need this little?
But is it adjacent to it or actually in the,
Well, some of these planning boundaries are arbitrary, like when we're up by Rio Road
yeah?
and we're drawing like this part of, you know, just eastern Rio Road, and we're saying, well, there needs to be a center here, and yet everyone's going right over to Route 29 and Rio Road, and that's their center, so.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's an artificial construct. It's not, you know, it's just because our map has a C in the middle of this area, but right here is the C that exists. So I don't wanna make these artificial centers. And then I was just saying that we have too many already. So I'm in agreement with this thing, the staff's recommendation, with those two caveats. So the second one was that there's too many. That's just my opinion, obviously.
Unless we're going in order, if I have very similar, and so I just want to kind of maybe build on Karen's, Commissioner Firehawks, points. So I was green with caveats or with comments. I do agree that we need to take a closer look at evaluating these centers, and the process that was outlined makes sense. So similar comment, and I would, maybe articulating a little bit differently. I think we dilute what we already have if we start to create all these. So I agree we have too many of these Cs already. So we need to be more intentional about where we're going to have them, so that we can think about infill, we can think about adaptive reuse, and densify the ones that we do have. That's going to be better for our infrastructure. In places that we don't have the infrastructure, as you densify, it's going to, you know, create the opportunities to then develop that infrastructure. So I'm concerned about the too much dilution instead of trying to densify and make better use of what we do have and be able to connect them better. Because once you densify, you're able to provide the transportation and other means that we don't have in a lot of these areas. So that's my main concern, is as we dilute by trying to create too many. So, go ahead, sorry.
No.
Thought that fit right into it.
It does fit. So I was agreeing on that also. And my sort of shade on that would be, some of them are not necessary, well, no. These reflect a lived-in environment that is now a reality. So this was these were projected and predicted way that we were gonna live as a community. And so I'd like us to spend some time validating, in fact, did this happen? And if it didn't happen, then is that one of the elements that can be used to evaluate whether or not it will function in the future? So to set up sort of an evaluation matrix to sort of say, this is what we said in 85 or whatever it was, and how have we lived into this, if at all? And then the piece where maybe a little bit, put a little bit of another shade on it. We hear a lot about the sort of dissolution of community. And so as we build activity centers, one of the things that I'd like us to sort of be cognizant of as we evaluate them is that, how do we create community? How do we let community move among these places that we say are Albemarle County? For instance, I can speak a bit about my area. It is really difficult. What am I? Places, no, I'm not north. What am I? Where am I? I'm not the Ravenna Village. I'm somewhere up here. Maybe I'm places 29 south. That's
Yes,
is that what I am?
Yeah.
See, you don't even know where you are.
Well, no, I did know what I was, but that's not what is that what they call us? Is that what they call our CAC? Places 29 south?
No, that was our term, sorry.
that was your
It basically, that would combine the Rio CAC and the hydraulic CAC.
That makes much more sense. Thank you so much.
It didn't fit on the map.
It
so
isn't
it was
fit.
north and south
So the piece there, if you look at that, sort of Stonefield is smack in the middle of the big center. But it's so hard to get there unless you drive. It is a
Right.
bear to get there if you drive.
Even if you drive, it's hard to get out of it.
But Kevin just found out we're gonna have a roundabout at District Avenue, so it's gonna make it better. Until you get to the parking lot. Until you get to the parking lot, but that's a whole different thing. But we can get you there, we just can't get you to the parking lot afterwards. So the whole idea is the centers still feel as if they're automobile centric. And that can be fine if that's what we want as a community. But I don't believe that that helps us extend community if everything's going to be automobile centric. And so whatever that balance is, then that's my balance.
Anybody else want to kind of follow with that stream or?
Sure, I'm happy to, is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
So just a few thoughts to both expand and maybe add a couple of additional comments. I also had a couple of questions, but I guess I'll make my comments more like the questions will be sort of embedded in that. And so one is you talked about the expectation to follow the neighborhood model principles and include a variety of housing types, a mix of uses, et cetera. I think we need to be aware, as is tied to sort of this macro versus micro review of these different centers, is to be aware of the need for flexibility depending on market influences. So I think to require all mixes of uses within a center can sometimes be not sustainable because of the market, right? And it just needs to be flexible. So if we're thinking about a long-term comprehensive plan as opposed to just a sort of flash in the pan, we need to be thinking more like that. I would be interested also in understanding developer impacts and responsibilities as we look through these activity centers. We talk about adding amenities. There's a talk about adding transportation networks, et cetera. It all takes money. So just thinking about how that's factored in relative to incentives or proffers, et cetera. And then also affordability, right? So a lot of these centers can be beautiful places to be and live and thrive, but also how do they serve all aspects of our community and not just those that can afford the highest cost homes and therefore those amenities that come with it. I think, and this was sort of stated a little bit, so I'm not trying not to restate things, but having sort of an overall understanding of a concept plan as it relates to these different centers, I think is important. So again, that's the macro micro piece. Just one thing that Commissioner Vivin said really resonated, which was a current assessment of where we are and how we've done, and how that informs where we're headed. And I think those were my key comments.
I do have a question about the districts. I was wondering if you could just kind of share a little bit about how the districts overlays or plays with the activity centers. That wasn't 100% clear to me.
Sure, and so those are designations that we have in the Crozet and Pantops master plans, but not currently in the other ones. And so they're really intended to highlight areas that are more focused on a single use, but still have a lot of activity. There's a lot happening there. So they might be, pretty much all dedicated to employment, kind of office flex uses. So there's not really the expectation for them to be as highly mixed use. So kind of recognizing those areas or parks that have regional importance and can connect neighborhoods to each other.
Is it uncommon to kind of use that same kind of concept to inspire or incentivize some of the things that we're looking for, like affordable housing or, the combat against climate change and the impact of buildings, for example? Is it uncommon to use a district to try to incentivize some of that?
It's something that we could take a look at.
I'm done. That was my comment before. That was my green yes and. So.
Can I ask a quick question, Tori, while we're asking questions? Under the recreational district, employment district, and institutional district, and under form and site design guidance, you sort of picked, as in collective, we have picked 2 to 4 stories up to 6 for employment district. how did we arrive at the densities for those? I think there's also on the DRPT's guidance, there's actually more detail on that form and site design guidance. Is that tied at all to trying to create as much density in these centers as possible, or what was the metric on that?
I'll start with the districts and then I'll turn it over to Vlad to talk about the centers. So the district place types, at least how we have them drafted now, we kept the same recommendations as Crozet and Pantops to be consistent. But for the centers, we did the activity center analysis and then kind of did a matching with the DRPT guidelines. So, I don't know, Vlad, if you want to cover a little bit more of that process.
Yeah, the DRPT guidelines had a statewide look at different place types and what their actual densities were from Tyson's Corner down to, a small village.
Yeah.
And so it broke them into 6 categories. And then those had FAR, density, typical building heights as kind of examples of each place type. And then those were used as the basis for the 3, DRPT had 6, but we are using 3 activity center types.
So I guess my question is there a point at which we might entertain more than 8 stories to help with our discussion about development expansion? So increased density.
I can maybe respond to that. So the 8 stories are what we had seen in the DRPT guidelines that seem to align with the development that we see in Albemarle County. Something like increasing those heights. I think those are some of the detailed topics that we can talk about when we get into like the goals and objectives related to land use, some of that. It will be entirely up to you all if you want to recommend some increased heights, but I don't think that's necessary now, but it's a great consideration for us to be aware of.
Got it, thank you.
Can I come back around just for a second? So for instance, in the Rouse Small Area Plan, could you just refresh, could you remind us what the height in the core buildings were? Because that may come to,
I believe 6 is the current maximum, 6 stories. That's recommended.
that's recommended, okay, got it.
Yeah, so that actually also struck me as being a little bit too prescriptive for this process. And so, because it goes back to Commissioner Bissell's flexibility, point on flexibility, we need to have some of that flexibility, both in terms of the types of mixed use that you may or may not have because of market forces, but also areas that can be densified. It goes back to the, how do we incentivize more density in the areas if we can, either through mixed use or adaptive reuse or infill. And if you can go 8 or 10, then in particular areas where you have transportation and you have the network, then why shouldn't we incentivize that?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the flexibility piece that we need to keep in mind.
I'll wait, I have something.
And Commissioner Murray had a yellow and a red, I think.
Yes. So while I agree with the concept, my concern is that CAC's already played a role in deciding where these are. And so I'd be concerned about reducing them without, a lot of CAC involvement in making sure that they are on board with that reduction. But I appreciate the context and the concepts. I do, also it does seem that when developments are approved, that part of the decision about whether something should be mixed use or not, include commercial or not, is their distance to these activity centers. And if we're going to reduce the activity centers, and we have projects we've already approved that are predicated on their proximity to an activity center. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that was true, okay, I'm seeing head shake. So maybe that's not a concern. I do like Commissioner Bivens' comment that the utility of an activity center really depends upon how accessible it is, that people can, and particularly like to access it from a multimodal standpoint. I think in terms of recreational districts. I think there's, we heard some comments about the desire for more green space in our urban areas. However, model for green space is really reliant on removal of green fields so that some small percent of that can be proffered back as green space. We should really consider transfer of development rights as a mechanism for flexibility to allow us to preserve larger areas and shift that development where we want it without the current sacrifice to protect methodology that we have now. I think also, although there's a lot of discussion about flexibility, I think flexibility is good. We would not want to be, my concern would be, we've seen some proposals where we had mixed use developments, now someone wants to come back and remove all the commercial out of that and take something that was mixed use and now render it just residential. I would not be in favor of that. If that flexibility results in something that's more mixed use, I'd be in favor of it. If that flexibility is reducing something that's mixed use and making it all residential or all commercial, I would not be in favor of that. I understand the desire that when we're in a time like now where there's not as much desire for office space or for commercial space, that some people may want to convert that to residential uses. But leaving that there as office space or commercial helps the prices go down so that people can afford to be able to find office space or find commercial space. If we jump in, allow it all to be converted to residential, we've removed that opportunity for those prices to come down.
May I say a couple of things? So if we're going to look at sort of the centers, the town centers, not versus centers, I think what I'm also feeling is if the county has to make a decision to put more green space in the developed area. Because right now we're ringed with recreation space that you can't get a bus to most of it.
Right.
In fact, I don't even know, you can't get a bus to it. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
There's no way to get a bus to it. And so if in fact, I think the county wants to send, the whole thing is about what are we doing? We're sending messages to developers. So if we're sending a message to a developer and the county comes along to a developer and says, if you come here, then in fact, we will put a park here and we'll maintain the park. And everyone knows that I would have preferred for the library not to be on the western side of 29, but for the library to be on the eastern side of 29, because that's where all the people are. And they could walk to the library, And so thinking about what are the signals that we send to people, send to the development community when we make investments. Okay. Now, to come alongside of Commissioner Murray, if we don't allow the kind of flexibility, developers will push off investment. Because no one is going to invest if they don't believe that they can either lease it up immediately or that they can lease it up maybe a little bit less than immediately. And that is in fact what we've seen. We've seen a bunch of projects since I've come on the planning commission that they were sitting out there for years. And then all of a sudden the developer could make the calculus that he or she could go forward. Some of that got packed out because of 2020. But it was very interesting to watch developers do the calculus on how we can move this project forward. And then all of a sudden it stops because the numbers change. The numbers change almost overnight. And so that's not about us. That's about, can I get money? Can I bring somebody to the table to do that? So I think part of what you're trying to, I hope what perhaps you're trying to suggest is, how do we create a set of regulations that not only is sensitive to the market forces, but also engages with a developer so he or she will come here and take a risk. That's because what you want is you want them to take a risk here, but you also want to give them enough freedom so that they can make a decision if I can get this risk financed. Can I get this risk financed?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
I think, I just would hate to see us, like there's been discussions about, Fashion Square Mall and that space, and should we allow residential uses by right? Now, I think if I think if residential use went into the Fashion Square Mall area, that'd be great. If it all became residential, that would be a horrific loss. So I think it's that balance, right? I mean, I think at the end of it, we want a walkable community. You can't have a walkable community if you end up with all one kind of use.
And we need jobs too. So that's
Yeah, we
the
need-
other balance I
we
think
need-
you're trying to put out
Yeah,
there.
you need jobs. I mean, I think in terms of tax revenue, the way that the best way to fund our schools and our roads and all this is to have commercial development. And if we don't we talk about affordable housing, and affordable housing is great, but affordable commercial space is also very important.
So we have one more commissioner to speak, and we have about 5 minutes that we've allotted for this topic for us to kind of keep moving along. What's the commissioner's name?
Commissioner Moore?
Commissioner Moore?
Hi there. I don't think I'll take up the full 5 minutes. I mostly agree with what others have said, particularly Commissioner Bivens, I think, pointing out things about the recreational areas. You know, if they're not accessible, then you know, what are we doing? There's something in all this that I don't want to. I mentioned it last time we had a meeting where I know that those who show up or those who we reach out to are those who we hear from. But also, if we're hearing from fewer than 100 people in person out of a county of 100 and some thousand, it does bother me a little bit. And so I do want to think about how do we get more people engaged in this kind of discussion. All that said, I'm very in favor of activity centers that are mixed use and walkable. I think it's a great overall plan.
I just want to just sort of +1 the idea that we need to, as a county, perhaps put some public infrastructure in some of these places that we want to see become centers. I've been working with different cities, and they've had some successes doing things like wanting to have more families to come into a commercial area. So they put one of those, I don't know what they're called, those spray things that kids run in and out of. But that made all the families want to come down there. And so the business district's no longer dead at night. So that made the restaurants want to come in. Well, then that made other services want to be there too. But the infrastructure was invested by the locality. The developers did not put in the spray pool for the kids. And they're not going to either. And they're not gonna put in the nice landscaping and all the other things, but that's what made those activity centers successful. And that's just one example, but if we just say, you know, we'll give you an extra 2 stories of density if you put in a bioswale, or we actually as a county need to put some money on the table to make these attractive places. We cannot just incentivize it through proffers. It hasn't worked. And to your point about sacrifice, please sir, please put a little green space in here, that doesn't get us much.
And I think, I was gonna say.
Can I ask +1 your +1, Karen?
Absolutely.
And to add on that just a little bit, like, I think one of those areas we really should invest in is structured parking. I think we know structured parking. We know that structured parking is expensive. The developers aren't necessarily going to want to build it. But I think if someone wants to redevelop an area like Alamo Square or Fashion Square Mall, we should get some skin in the game and say, listen, we'll help pay for some of the structured parking to make that happen.
I'll just add one final thing also, just, we're thinking 20 years out, right? So what does the world look like in 2044? How does working from home look, and how does that intensify activity centers? I don't have the answer, but just want to pose that question as something to kind of contemplate on as we move through this as well. How does how we live 20 years from now impact the intensity of these various centers?
Many firms are saying, get your butt back to work.
We'll see how long it lasts.
Yeah.
Unless you work on Wall Street and you can't turn down the money,
That's
right?
right. Well, not even Wall Street, not even Wall Street. Even small firms are saying, they've got an investment in office space. And they're watching the sort of auxiliary services around offices shrivel up.
Yeah.
So the mom and pop stores that we're trying to sort of encourage,
Shiners and things like that.
you know, they're saying, I can't take the risk anymore because I don't have the foot traffic.
You're right.
And so what does foot traffic look like 20 years from now? What would that be? You know.
Have you been to Columbia, Maryland?
Yep.
I think they've done I think they did a great job in terms of what we're talking about, like activity centers. I mean, in terms of like having focal points in the community, like a recreational lake or something with, a bunch of shops, the ability to walk from here to there, a network of trails. I would love to see that as the future for our community.
But remember, that's one guy. That was the Roushes. It was the Roushes who bought up a bunch of land and did that planned community from scratch. They said how many hotels were going to be there, where the office parks were going to be, where the big fairground that you can go watch concerts. You know, that's the kind of thing that one a small family with a lot of money decided they were going to take a risk. I sort of contrast that with Greenbelt, Maryland, which was done by the feds. Greenbelt, Maryland was done by the feds, which is the antithesis of Levittown. So we have planned communities around the United States. Most of them were done by commercial people. I won't even spit real hard on the name Levittown, but Columbia, Maryland and Greenbelt are places that in fact are planned communities and with a different spirit of what it means to be a community. And we could do that here, but I don't know if our development portfolio today is similar in type. You know, I don't know how you buy 200 acres today. Oh, well, you do, but I don't. You know how you buy 200 acres. I don't know how you buy 200.
I mean, Julie, Commissioner Bivens, we just did buy a whole bunch of acres. But yes, your point is well taken.
So we're rounding out the time that we thought we'd spend talking about this one. And just, Vlad has captured, kind of distilled out some of your comments. So I guess the question is, are you all willing to say to the Board of Supervisors that you recommend option 2 with these comments added to it?
Would you mind kind of going through what really jumped out is where the check marks are?
Those are just
There's a
plus
section
ones,
over there.
where folks had
Okay,
added to it.
got you.
My takeaway is substantial agreement, but concerns about can we make this work? How do we incentivize it? What is an activity center and the mix of uses? And then concept of flexibility came up, and was discussed.
Yeah.
Density.
I mean, I could support it if it was in the form of a draft, like here's what we would like to do. Now let's run it through the CACs and the master planning process and see if the communities actually support this. I would not support forcing this upon them without their consent.
So that's what I wanted to clarify earlier. I'm hearing a couple different things. What I heard was that these are not set in stone now.
That's right. That's right.
So when you say they come out of the CAC, is that?
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, isn't there a general concept, isn't there a general, I mean, my understanding, and I apologize as a new commissioner, my understanding is that there is, at least in Crozet, a general idea of where they want activity centers to be, where they have ideas about this is where we would like things to be.
There's a master
Well,
plan.
but the comp plan predates the CIC's existing. There was no comp plan, there was no CIC formed when the comp plan was created. There are master planning processes that have gone on since the comp plan, where CICs have participated.
Well, that's sort of what I'm saying. is
Yeah,
that-
but I'm just saying like the Cs that you see in the comp plan map, I mean, staff, please jump in.
I can,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Some of them are new, maybe, I don't know.
I can start, and Kevin, if you wanna jump in too, but if it helps, because Crozet and Pantops were done so much more recently, those centers are, pretty much unchanged, kind of a one-to-one recognizing what's there. And then while Village of Rivanna was done a little bit longer ago, it's still just recognizing one center of the same scale. Places 29 and Southern and Western are a little different in part because they were updated, quite a bit ago. And I think even Places 29 was like 12 years ago. And so, we're hoping to continue to get CAC engagement during the comp plan process, but just recognizing that those are fairly outdated and kind of need, we think, the most consolidation of centers. We had quite a few CAC members attend the online open house, because that was also a joint CAC meeting.
Right.
But happy to, keep getting engagement through them during the comp plan.
And tonight's discussion isn't where they're going.
Right.
No, no.
And we've even gotten more specific than I think the facilitation team was asking.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that, because to me, I mean, something like a master plan can inform these, but the conversation hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that was my understanding, but I'm glad you brought it up, because
But I think it's
started
colored,
questioning what.
well, so I guess it's colored by Crozet being the area that I'm most interacting with, and that they have been way ahead of the other areas. So that's probably what's colored by.
I'll just maybe build on that real quick to help. So it is, for one thing, to your point about what we're gonna do in the future. If we decide that activity centers are the way we wanna go tonight, the next steps will be looking at these, that we've got some draft areas that we've already identified, but we can refine those in the upcoming months of this plan. And then the idea is that when we do have a master plan update, primarily for the Southern and Western and Places 29 areas, that we would reevaluate maybe the size and the type of development we want to see, the function of those centers. Those are things that we could get into. To address Commissioner Murray's point, what we did in the Crozet Master Plan update is really what we're recommending to move forward with throughout the county now. We're not asking to change what was in Crozet. What we're doing is taking the Crozet and sort of the Pantops and even the Rio 29 small area plan and saying this is the model we should go with for the rest of the county.
Thank you for that clarification.
And so would you all say, as Vlad said, that there's substantial agreement that for topic 1, you would recommend to the Board of Supervisors option 2? Are you all ready to? Okay, yeah, it's not a vote, but just a recommendation.
It's a lot of greens,
We're all
it's a lot of
nodding
greens.
heads.
Two pages of caveats.
2 pages of caveats.
2 pages of caveats, and those will be brought together by staff and presented to the board. Thank you all. I think we're ready to move on to our next topic, topic number 2.
All right, so topic number 2, factors for future development areas expansion. The current plan recommends monitoring development areas' estimated capacity for future residential and business demand with high-level guidance on when an expansion may need to be considered. While an expansion may not be needed in the near future, as part of long-range planning in the context of uncertain and changing conditions, the possibility that the current development areas may at some point no longer have sufficient capacity to accommodate future housing and employment needs is clearly considered in the current comp plan and with AC 44. The current plan does not have guidance on how to identify locations for expansion if an expansion is found to be needed. The updated plan could include factors for how and where to expand, including infrastructure considerations, protection of natural resources and water supply watersheds, and expectations for future development patterns. These factors could also be taken a step further during AC 44 to be applied to map possible locations for future expansion. During engagement, we heard that protecting natural resources and water supply watersheds, preserving the rural area, enhancing tree coverage, and addressing transportation impacts are all high priorities when considering expansion. Infrastructure should be in place or planned before additional growth. And overall support for using the development areas efficiently and promoting infill and redevelopment and only expanding when necessary for residential and business needs. However, the already high price of housing and limited housing choice was a significant concern. During the April Commission meeting, the Commission asked the AC 44 team to consider locations of high quality natural resources in the rural area, including resources identified in the Biodiversity Action Plan. So the team has provided the following map on the back wall there as a reference to show a series of natural resources in the county. So green indicates areas that have requirements in place that preclude significant development, including steep slopes, floodplains, stream buffers, and conservation easements. Orange indicates areas that have temporary restrictions, such as agricultural and forestal districts and open space agreements. And pink indicates areas that are identified as important resources per county policies, but without requirements that preclude development, such as the forest blocks and the Biodiversity Action Plan, water supply watersheds, and scenic streams. And also wanted to note at the previous meeting that several commissioners discussed a desire not to expand the growth area if there are remaining developable areas in the current development areas, as having more limited land can encourage more efficient use of that land, and infill and redevelopment should be prioritized. So there are 3 options for this topic, and option 1 is no change to the current plan recommendations with AC 44. So future steps after the comp plan could include continual updates to the land use build-out analysis and monitoring development trends. Option 2 is to continue to develop and refine the draft factors that have been shared, and do that during the AC 44 process, including more detailed descriptions of each factor and potential metrics. Future steps after AC 44 could include continuing to update the build-out analysis, applying the factors for evaluating locations if an expansion is found to be needed in the future, and using small area plans for recommendations in expansion areas. Option 3 is to use those draft factors during AC 44 to conduct an analysis and identify possible locations for future development areas expansion with possible timeframes for future expansion. Staff is recommending this option as knowing where future development may occur is important for infrastructure planning needs, since agencies such as RWSA plan for infrastructure improvements and extensions years in advance. Additionally, this option could help address possible gaps or changes in land use capacity by identifying primary land use needs in expansion areas. The level of detail in mapping could be very general in location, or it could show specific parcels depending on the level of detail needed for infrastructure planning. With any option that is pursued for this topic, staff wants to emphasize that efficient use of the development areas should continue to be prioritized over expansion, while recognizing that at some point it is likely the development areas will need to be expanded to accommodate future housing and business needs. Staff also wanted to note that with any of these options, there could be some changes to the development area's boundaries with AC 44 for minor adjustments and unique circumstances, such as a portion of an existing neighborhood that is just outside of the boundaries, or county-owned property such as several schools that are just outside of the boundaries but are on public water and sewer. So we'll turn it over to the commission for discussion.
All right, thank you, Tori. So again, we have the cards with the same framework for you to kind of get a pulse of where you are right now with recommendation for option 3 for topic 2. So pick your color and that will be the beginning of our discussion.
Question for clarification.
Yes.
Between 2 and 3, is the only difference the overlay of a horizon timeline?
Mapping, yeah, so option 2
Yeah,
is,
mapping as well, right?
I gotta go ahead.
so option 2
Again,
would
so
be.
that's why I want to clarify.
Yeah, option 2 would just be having the factors, so both, the timing considerations like the land use build out, but then also if we expand, these are the things we should consider, but not actually going further than that, just having those in the comp plan. But then option 3 is we take those factors, apply them, and actually map out possible future expansion areas.
And can I further clarify that option 3 is not actually recommending that we expand right now. It's identifying the areas where expansion would be possible if in the future the board and PC decide that that's prudent. So I just want to make sure that's understood, that we're not recommending this, we're just identifying the areas where it could happen at this point.
Any other clarifying questions before we get the pulse? Okay, so I invite you to, green being yes with
Yes.
caveat, yellow being caution and red being, no. All right. And Nathan, and Commissioner Moore?
Thank you. I would be a green yellow. Like I think it's a good idea mostly.
Okay,
Your new favorite color.
all right,
Green
so,
and yellow.
so let's
I don't
start
know.
with green and move toward yellow and then toward red, so. Who would like to speak?
See the floor to Commissioner Bivens, he was agreeing.
I was green. So I think it's helpful and not helpful. I think it's prudent to create a model that can be used by future supervisors and planning commission. Now, when we're not under pressure to make the decision. So I think right now, it would be since there's an agreement that there is not going to be an expansion of the development area today.
That's right.
But I think it is helpful to be able to say, if that should happen, here's where it could and how the planning commission of 2024 and the supervisors of 2024 suggested that these are the criteria that should be that might be considered by the leaders at that point in time on how to go forward. Now, remembering that at that point in time, there will be a validation and an analysis of that decision making. But I think one of the situations I found myself in is that there is no way except for passion for me to say the development area cannot be expanded. That feels like one of those parent may I, and the parent said no. I don't have any intellectual sort of context in order to say, well, how did they get to know? How did they get to this position that there's no expansion or there's no reshaping of the development community, of the development area? And I think it would be helpful for upcoming supervisors and planning commission to be able to have something for them to make decisions from, for them to reflect upon. And that's why I support option 3.
I guess I was the second green, so happy to go next. Super plus one, you use the word prudent, I'll be a little bit more stern, I'll say foolish. And I say that because as I think back to the Metro in Washington DC, right? So I use as an example, I work in Washington. There was a point where people were around the table talking about the Metro and how far should we extend it? And somebody said Gainesville and they got laughed out of the room. Today, they would be dying to have Metro in Gainesville, Virginia, right? And so I just want to caution us as a collective group as we have this discussion. Is there something that we're not seeing in foresight that'll get you laughed out of the room today? 20 years from now, people will be like, oh, that was a great idea, right? There were two things as I looked through the data that was provided. One was regarding economic development, that in terms of tier 4 sites, I think they said there was only one that could be brought to market. That's problematic. So I think we gotta look at that. My rhetorical question that is, what kind of amazing jobs and employment are we sacrificing because of that? Where people could now buy a house or rent, right? We talk about affordable housing, part of that is income as well. The second one I saw was, well, I think we talked about that, the rezonings are only hitting 58%. So we were talking about incentivizing, it's maximizing that. I'll pause there, but I do have one question about the 20-year demand forecast for office space. I'm just curious, does that take into consideration life after the pandemic, those numbers that are reflected?
I think, it was something that consultant Kimley Horn looked at, but they mostly base their, predictions off of past trends and kind of acknowledged it in the text, but felt like they didn't quite have enough information to drastically change predictions off of past trends.
Thank you.
Let me come alongside to what the chair said. So another part of the Metro question was that at one point the Metro was to go up Route 7, which is Annandale. And the good people of Annandale pitched a fit. And so it didn't go up Route 7. They diverted it and it went up, and I think it's 231 or something like that. All of a sudden, all of the property on Route 7 went completely down because those people couldn't get to Washington, which is where they were. And so they've now had to come in and get buses and to try and get the people on Route 7 when they could have had a much more vibrant community if the Metro had just been allowed to go up there. So there is that sort of balance that we have to say that what are the economic balances that occur when a community says, no, we don't want that here, and all of a sudden gets diverted, and that has an impact of sort of shutting the community down.
Commissioner Moore, did you want to chime in? You said you were kind of green, yellow.
I think just green, really. I think we know that the land in our development area that could be developed is a small percentage of what's there. It's like what, 7%, I think. It makes a lot of sense to me to plan when we might grow that. Like, I'm not saying, hey, let's pave the county, right? Nobody's saying that. But if we want enough land for the people who live here and the people who are going to live here and the people who are going to move here because they need to from all kinds of things, we have to think about when that might happen and what might trigger it. And just, even looking at our growth area map now, I feel like there are some areas that are not in it that could be. Just looking up 29, I mean, like, you cross the line in Greene County, oh, suddenly there's a growth area, but it's not in ours, So there are things that I think we yes, should absolutely consider when and how we make that call.
Thank you. Would like to go next? We're into the
You
green,
were
yellow
red,
zone.
right? I'll go to,
I'm
you
all
wanna go to
red.
yellow next?
Green, yellow, we're moving into that.
So I'm like a light greenish yellow?
Okay.
Is that all right?
Light greenish yellow.
Greenish yellow.
It's a lie.
I'm starting to become more green and yellow. So I just have a couple of thoughts, and forgive me if these are not well organized, because they're all over the place. One of the things for me that this whole discussion comes down to is timing. If we were talking about a 5 to 10 year thing, that's one thing. If we're talking about 20 and beyond years, likely, that's a different story for me. And I tend to turn closer to a green when I'm thinking about a longer timeline, because I think that needs to get pushed out. I think, my gut is always, I'll make sure this is something you can actually write. My feeling is generally that the idea of expanding development areas first triggers a reaction, which is, oh no, we want our county to stay the way it is. It's beautiful. This is the camel's nose in the tent. If we do this, it's just going to be all over, right? And what I would say is I sort of caution myself to think what this is doing is it's causing us to be very thoughtful about preservation as much as it is about development expansion. And so thinking about both sides equally, I think is something that is a challenging thing to think about, to equally think about the benefits, the pros of looking at expansion, as well as the challenges or the potential impacts to natural resources, et cetera. I think it's incredibly important that if we move into this discussion, we do so with an understanding of what the infrastructure, and we've all been talking about this. How is it even possible to get water and sewer to these places? Is there that financial capacity? Is there the service capacity? Do we have the reservoirs that can serve these different areas, right? Or if not, what does our 10 to 20 year timeline look like for those? Where I start to get a little bit more in the yellow-red range is when we start to talk about mapping. That just gets me a little nervous. And what I would recommend is, rather than parcel identification, because that starts to get really defined, we think more about this in a way that's like a heat map, right? Like, these areas are green, these are red, these are yellow, and it's more of a blurred boundary as opposed to a really defined boundary. And I think the benefit of that will be twofold. One is if somebody starts seeing their parcels identified as the future development area, it's going to start messing with the market a little bit. And there may or may not be ways that water and sewer can be extended efficiently that are more topographic than anything else on a certain parcel. And I think you start to get way into the weeds really quickly when you start thinking about that. So I'd think more heat map, boundary, blurred approach than a specific approach. I will say that, you know, I'd be a lot greener if we were seeing efficient use of existing development areas. So I think we're all
Yeah,
saying
yeah, we're saying
we need to
same
make
thing.
sure that's absolutely
We're all
a
saying it.
focus. And I think staff has underlined that would be an area of focus. And I'll stop there.
I was another yellow. And for very similar reasons as Commissioner, this is, I'm gonna try not to repeat, but yes, there's a +1 there. So I'm not opposed to option 3 with caveats. And that's what I think yellow is for. That's why it was yellow. It's not that it's a no for me, it's simply that I like your reference of the camel's nose in the tent. So I wouldn't say that it's the camel's nose in the tent, but we know there's a tendency of developing the low-hanging fruit. If it's less cost for me to develop a greenfield, I'm gonna develop the greenfield. So then we're not incentivizing infill, density, and all the things that we talked about in those other, in those 2 sheets of paper. We're not incentivizing that by just saying we're gonna add more to the growth area, or we're going to, and this is where I do think there is the cautionary note is, if you do start to identify the areas through mapping, developers are gonna buy them.
As they already have.
And if you want to look at, I mean, what's even more dangerous to our rural communities is, and I'll say it's our solar fields. That's even more so than this growth areas, because what's happening right now is that people are already buying any land that's next to a high distribution, because they gotta be, in order to be a large solar, they gotta be by power distribution lines. They're not by there, it's not as cost effective, being bought out. Same signal you'll send here. So we really have to be thinking about how do we, yes, 20 years from now, you probably could expand, and perhaps we should have an idea how much acres that is, how much additional development do we have beyond the 20 years. So, but we're not incentivizing all the, and there's a lot, there is so much that's inefficient use all throughout this county. And we know large parcels of land that are sitting.
Or storage, self-storage lockers that, you know, sprawling out.
Yeah.
Can I add a sort of +1 to that as well? And one thing that might be interesting to consider is as this plan moves forward, is there a way to build into it? Maybe it's not in the comp plan, maybe it's another instrument, but a checks and balances approach to things. So if we're 10 years out and we're not doing very well in terms of densifying our existing, then we push that whole conversation about development areas further out.
Right. And
to keep ourselves.
Yeah, and we know we're at what, 50% or 58% of our density capacity.
Yeah.
That's what we're building to.
So and that's where I lean to this too. I think there need to be set thresholds for, you know, redevelopment, and also not just redevelopment, but also the form of development. To make sure that we're actually building walkable, livable development. It wasn't by Charlottesville's choice, but when annexation was stopped, Charlottesville started to become more walkable. It started to become more livable. You started to see underground parking garages. You started to see more sidewalks. You know, it started to become the place that it wanted to be before. If we put out there on the horizon, well, oh, don't worry, if you use this up, we're going to expand the development areas, and we're even going to specify where we're going to do it. You've just removed any chance that people are going to redevelop these underperforming areas. It's just not going to happen. But if you set a threshold, like we expect, such and such percentage, 75% redevelopment of these underperforming areas, or whatever the number is, before we're going to go down the route of making heat map. then I could get behind that. But I think you need to have those set thresholds that need to be reached before you even have that discussion, because otherwise, you're just, as you say, I mean, you're gonna send the wrong signal.
I can't help myself. Here's the thing that comes to mind is economics, right? I mean, it's everything we're talking about is it's driven by development economics. You're talking about the phases of development. First is surface parking, then it's above ground structured parking, then look at Tyson's, it's underground parking, right? And that's all driven by the economics of the land. It's what that land will support. So it's the pressure on the development community or on the county from the development community, because at some point who knows, we may say, wow, we're 75% full. This is great. It's time to go to look at expanded development areas. But are we full with structured parking or underground parking or surface parking? Like, what is that trigger point? It's all kind of blurry.
Yes.
So let me just sort of come across this. So, Tyson's is a great example. So I don't know what we have here right now that would be the nucleus for a Tyson's type of experience. So you have a couple of things that happened at Tyson's. Well, you had a UVA graduate that bought all the land, so that's one thing. But you also had the confluence of a bunch of roads there.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, that were always going to be there. And you also had, and this is what's interesting about Tyson's now, because it's flipped. So you had created this sort of economic sort of playground there for some pretty Tony people that's flipped back into the district now. So all of the sort of Tony boutiques, which sort of made that sort of Tyson's intersection, I don't want to be sort of wrong languaged here. The average income has increased in Tyson's, but the goods and services moved into the district. So if anybody knows where City Center is in the district, it was going to be some big tech thing, and then they decided it's not going to be a tech thing. All of the Tony boutiques moved there. There's a Tesla there, there's a blah, blah, blah. I could go through the list of things there. And so what's happened is that Tyson's it's still very expensive, but it's moved down because the population who needs Tyson's needs it for the transportation network. They put the metros out there. You can get all of these, it's like 5 or 6 big exchanges there now. And so my point when I hear that is like, what do we have here that would cause that?
I would say the closest thing is hydraulic and 29, existing roads, always going to be there. Stonefield had parking structures in their master plan.
Across 2 jurisdictions.
Sorry?
Across 2 jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's actually true. Yeah.
If we can have that entire jurisdiction, then I think we have the opportunity to come to sort of having this note. But I think really where it's going to happen, we're going to see it at Hollyfield, not Hollyfield. Hollymead. We're going to see that's going to become the new center, because all of those roads that are coming in with the airport and the blah, 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 and the fact there are 4 gas stations, there's a gas station, that's where I think you're going to see the migration of that, which is different from the Tyson's example.
I think the other thing that's worth considering as well about a map, there's another really significant downside. The way revenue sharing is calculated with the city of Charlottesville is based upon the assessed values of property. If we go and we specify in that map, this is where the future growth area is going to be, developers are going to go out there and they're going to buy it up. Because it's in the rural area, a whole lot of that is under land use valuation. So we're not collecting taxes based upon the assessed value. We're collecting it on the land use value. That means we're going to be paying a lot more money to the city of Charlottesville in land use valuation. And revenue sharing. So that's a very expensive proposition if we're not careful. And you see that already on 29. You see areas that are in the rural area, but are close enough to the growth area that everyone anticipates that they will be developed. And you'll see properties that are worth millions of dollars that pay less property taxes than I pay on my 2 acres. And
All right, so I didn't get to go yet. So, had everyone already said everything I'd said?
No,
I mostly
did
agree
not.
with Commissioner Missile and Mr. Carazana, Commissioner Carazana. I completely agree with you. So I don't support option 3 because I don't wanna see a map. Because, you know, it was funny you brought the metro. I rode the very first metro that drove to the city. That's how old I am. But I remember too that when as those future metro stations were announced, all that land got snatched up and became extremely unaffordable. And so, you know, even when we had the Deschutes Brewery proposal here, and that never did come because the site was completely inappropriate and unready, as we already know. But the county felt obliged to expand that area, the development area. So they rezoned that for, but not the whole thing that was wanted. So, you know, it was only about a quarter of what was requested. But developers came and gave out slick brochures to people who were even way past that, like a mile past, more than a mile past, saying, hey, I'd like to buy your land because potentially if they're gonna rezone that, well, guess what? They'll probably do this and that. And so there weren't even talking about places we had mapped, but places adjacent and way down the road to what the county was saying they were willing to change the growth density. So my concern is that if we put it on a map, developers will go out and buy up all that stuff, just like you used the example with the solar. And you talk about an affordable housing problem. We're not gonna get affordable land by putting it on a map and signaling that we are really open to this particular area. I totally get that the county would love to have, and I would too if I'm babbling, sorry. The county would love to have certainty of where they should be investing their funds for wastewater treatment, water supply, future roads, sidewalks, transit, whatever, schools, you name it. I would love to too if I'm in charge of any of those things. But, you know, unfortunately, by putting that on a map, we're going to make it a big speculation problem where people are going to go and get a hold of that land, even if it hasn't been changed. So I am in favor of developing the specific factors for consideration. I wrote, way back when we first started talking about this, I wrote off to the folks in Portland Metro and asked for all of their stuff on how they make decisions on how they expand the growth area. I didn't send it to our consultants because they probably already got all that stuff and know all that. But, you know, just to they have a very detailed process and criteria because they have expanded the metro area.
Which Portland?
Portland, Oregon.
Right.
They have expanded that growth area over time, but they have a very specific process for how that could happen. And we could have something like that. But I just don't, you know, I'm not in favor of the map. I just think and to living within our means in terms of what drives the market. If we're signaling that we're willing to keep putting notches in our belt, then our diet is not gonna work.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a great point.
If the
Great
rationale
point.
is so that we can have a projection on where to expand the services, the reality is we have 20 years of need now within our, in terms of expanding our roads, expanding our services, transit services, our schools, just infrastructure.
Right.
Catching up.
Just to catch up, we have 20 years to do that still.
Right.
And we wouldn't get to all the things that we need.
no, we'd be building that new school and that new,
Right.
you know.
So I will just sort of share, as we all know, that the speculation is going to take place whether or not there's a map, whether or
Yes.
not there's a map there or not. And if we go up 29 is really owned by two entities. You know, not excluding your entity, but you know, it was, you don't have to exclude your entity because you weren't a player in that. And that you aren't, you know, it's, and we know who the entities are. And so they did the thing that any good business person's gonna do. They took a bird's eye view and said, where do we think there's the least amount of pressure? And that's where we're gonna start buying a plan. And that's what they did. And I think if we, and perhaps I like the heat, I like the heat map because I wasn't thinking that this was gonna go down to parcel. But I do think that there is a way, in fact, sort of saying that if we're gonna move in a direction, here's a direction that has the least amount of, that has the most options to it. Because along that has to come with the fact that we've been seeing is that people have been converting industrial and commercial space land to residential. And we can't continue to do that. Whether or not it's mixed use or not mixed use, we have to have land here that attracts developers or that attracts business people who want to come here and stand up some sort of business. And they're not going to come here if they don't have a sense that either through the economics development or through community development, that they know that they're going to have the kind of resources in there. They're not going to come here for gray zones. Gray zones are expensive for that kind of development.
Could I, sorry to interrupt, could I ask Commissioner Corazano, I didn't quite get your comment down here. You said we have 20 years of need or 20 years of backlog or what?
Listen, if we're backlog, so every single issue that we have for any SUP development that we have, roads, the infrastructure is not there to accommodate the development, and the schools. So just within, but they're within the development zones, they're within our growth zones, and they're in our comp plan. And it says you can develop and you can upzone, but we don't have the infrastructure there. And that's in practically every case. So we have a lot of catching up to do just to meet the needs of the infrastructure for the growth that we have today and the growth that we have planned within the existing growth areas.
Does that move you towards favoring criteria for expansion or not favoring it?
So a criteria for expansion we should have. I think it would be irresponsible not to have, right?
Right.
So what is it, so outlining what we would need to meet in order to have the next expansion. You know, the conversation that I have with my commissioner to my right here is, do we want to incentivize infill and adaptive reuse or not?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's a fundamental question, because if we do, then we shouldn't send signals to the opposite.
And Commissioner Bivens, your comment about housing, converting mixed use or commercial to housing, how did that relate to this expansion?
So I think that when we tend to talk about expanding development area, people always tend to sort of focus on the housing piece of it. And my piece is that it's a bit more holistic and there's much more of a mix of land types that are there. That we also need to be thinking about what kind of commercial or light industrial entities we need to bring here to be able to sustain that kind of sort of that housing stock. Otherwise, my concern is that our housing stock only gets focused on retirees or people who are coming here from other jurisdictions that they can cash out and buy a $400,000 to $600,000 house without having to be significantly cramped by a mortgage. And we can want that kind of community, but I don't believe that that's the type of community that is beneficial for the long-term of Albemarle County. And then where it's coming from that, if you look at 58%, some of us have been on the commission long enough to have where somebody wanted to bring a higher density project and they got shouted out the room basically. And so the issue is not sometimes that the developers have a lack of wanting to do something. It's that our community goes after them if they suggest something that's sort of close to a 90% density or an 80% density. And so people are going to do what people are going to do. I'm not going to invest my dollars in a place if I feel as if I'm just going to get beat up for this idea. I can go someplace else and invest my money. Because remember, I know this is going to offend people. Albemarle County is not the only place that people can invest money. And we can make that decision. The supervisors can make the decision to pull up the roads and say nobody else is coming here. I hope they don't do that. But people can go put their money someplace else, as we've seen. Greene County, Louisa, Fluvanna County, places like, not going to happen in Nelson yet, but it's going to happen in Nelson. And so what's the balance that we want around how that expands?
So we're at 35 minutes.
That's exactly what's happening.
Of the 40 that we were thinking we would spend on
I
this.
just wanted to, sorry, if I can, 2 minutes, 1 minute.
So,
50
and
seconds.
we're gonna move it toward
We have 5 minutes.
what's your pleasure in terms of your recommendation?
I just wanted to give a very tangible example to the question that Vlad asked in terms of the infrastructure. So let's take Crozet, right? Crozet, we have a master plan and it densifies Crozet quite a bit. there's a lot of growth planned for Crozet. We have nowhere near the infrastructure there. How many years is it gonna take to actually getting the appropriate streets to bring the amount of traffic that's planned for Crozet, the amount of density that's planned for Crozet? When are we gonna get the infrastructure there? How long is that gonna take? So that's just a tangible example of what I was getting at a broader county level.
And I'm gonna lay on it, even if we say yes today, how do we get VDOT to say yes?
Right.
How do we get the Commonwealth
Right.
to say, even if we say yes today?
Right, how long is it gonna take?
Yeah, because they'll say, we don't care, we're gonna put a tunnel in Newport News or
That's
Newport,
right.
whatever that place is called.
I just wanna make a last quick point, just classic urban planning 101. If you allow the growth and you make maps and everyone knows like this is where it's going, you get that leapfrogging, so you get the first suburb and it's nice and everyone likes it, but then they build the next one, well, that's a little bit nicer, and so on and so forth, so then you have the deterioration of the inner ring suburbs. This is well documented, and if we don't invest in the suburbs we have.
Right.
And
Never will.
you know, maybe we need bigger, better, 5-story schools, whatever, to create, so that you really want to put you wanna go through the process of densifying and putting in housing, 'cause that's a great school inside the urban ring. And and so there's plenty for our county to spend their money on. They want to upgrade water and sewer and schools and all of that in the growth area that we have.
Okay, we have a suburban school model.
Yeah.
Everything's
Right, we
on
have
one level.
single story and multi-acres surrounding the schools that just get mowed. So we can hire more mowers.
More mowers, goats, we can put goats out.
How's that word?
Commissioner Firehawk, I do want to push back just very slightly on the notion of the inner ring suburbs being, like not great now. Like I live in one, they're fine. But also, I see your point. I look at the county zoning maps, and I live in an area that's all like R1, R2, and it's like, yeah, this could actually be used much more efficiently than it is. This is the growth area, and we're not growing in my neighborhood or the next neighborhood over, or the next neighborhood over from that, and I think we should. I do.
So we're at the time where I'd love to hear what would be your recommendation to the board at this point? So
2.5. Can
Yeah,
I
2.5.
define what I'm talking about?
Yeah, 2.5.
So what I would go for is option 2 with the tweak to after the word factors. So instead of saying without identifying potential timeframes or locations for future expansion at this time, I would say both timing and location factors rigorously tied to successfully measuring and achieving density within the existing development areas and defined by general and regional locations.
That's important.
say that one more time for us.
You can't ask me to do that.
I thought you were
Alright,
reading.
so-
It was on the fly.
Yeah.
It's on the fly.
That was awesome.
So develop a set of factors for consideration of potential future development area expansion to include both timing and location rigorously tied to successfully measuring and achieving density within the current development areas, and locations defined generally or regionally. Yeah.
Regionally.
I'm agreeing on that.
Is it fair to say, for versus option 2 with generalized mapping?
Probably better, yeah.
And then
Shorthand.
the
Yeah.
other piece.
And tying it to factors that we evaluation factors for densities within the development area or how we're developing within.
Yeah,
That's one of
successfully
the-
achieving the densities within the.
To tying it to thresholds within existing
Yeah.
development
Yeah,
areas, okay.
doubling down on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would also say not just density, but I hope when we refer to density, we're also talking about quality of density.
Yeah.
So back to the comment you reported, when we say density, not just density of people, but density of service.
That's good. Yeah, yeah.
Is there substantial agreement with that addendum?
Fill my card up, yeah, for me.
I'll just say, I don't know, now I'll be like everyone else and be like.
No, be like everyone else.
Green yellow card. I'm still nervous about the map, blob, a heat map, but I mean, I run a mapping firm, that's all I do all week is make maps. And I really would have to see what that looked like. Would that be something that would lead to the speculation that I'm concerned about, or, you know, so I like what you did. I'm just still, I'd like to see what that map was before I could say green full on.
I think having the recommendations or the, I don't know what we call it, the gates, right? You need to meet certain things for development in the current growth areas. And then you start to evaluate, because Commissioner Vivian's absolutely right. People have already figured out where the next growth area is gonna be, and they're already
So
evaluating it
they
out.
think.
So they
Got AI.
You know, it's like Monopoly.
Some of that has been thwarted.
I think what's more.
Some of that has come up and been thwarted in reality.
But, you know, if you own the land.
I'm not talking speculation, I'm talking about actual.
Then they turned it into a vineyard and they started to, so they have a backup plan. So, no, I think what's more important is just having those requirements, like you need to meet certain expectations, we have to be at a certain density.
Right, these
We can't just be
benchmarks.
at 58%.
Right.
Of our development. I mean, there's gotta be these benchmarks.
Right,
I think that's more important.
and they have to be measurable.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah,
to be
they gotta
something you
be
could
measurable.
actually quantify, you did or did not achieve that.
Well, and I think, and as I said before, I think where the generalized mapping would come into play shouldn't even happen until after we've reached those benchmarks. And I think that helps address what you're talking about. In the
Yes,
sense that
correct.
like, because once we reach those benchmarks, then we can say, okay, we're ready to do this.
Right.
So
And
do
then-
you all feel like, I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you feel like Vlad has captured what your yes is and what your recommendation
If I could
would
just
be?
also add, to try and address Commissioner Firehawk's issue, as we proceed with any mapping, what we can do is start with something that is so generalized that it's really not taking much of a step further. It's not telling people anything additional. And then we can trim that back as the commission would prefer, so that we're not, so that we don't go overboard first and identify places. We can start with a very high level mapping. And if we determine that that's not enough, we can bring it back. Would that help?
I just have to see it.
I think you're gonna, I mean, what you're gonna,
Yeah.
You gotta
I
get
just, I mean, and I know that would happen during this process.
I think what you're gonna find, as you guys all well know, is that RWSA has a plan. VDOT has a plan.
That's right.
There are influencing plans that are already looking at where to develop and where that's going. So we're kind of acting like we're gonna create this new map and it's gonna be a revelation and everybody's gonna go buy the stuff, but the reality is it's like you said,
Info's out there.
it's already moving there, and so I think you'll learn a lot from those plans maybe, I don't know, and then be able to expand on that.
Do we feel like we have a recommendation so that we can move on to the
Mhm.
third topic?
Might be a good time for a bio break, at least for me, so.
Like a hazard.
I'll use chair privilege, I'll call us to a recess for 7 minutes.
Awesome.
So.
Thank you.
I'll keep voting for you as chair.
I will turn it back.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're ready to go.
Thank you. I'm gonna turn it to Tori to take us through topic number 3.
So topic number 3 is rural crossroads communities, which are recognized as places in the rural area with a small historic commercial center that may or may not still have active commercial uses or community gathering places. They can provide businesses and services for surrounding community members and are intended to encourage adaptive reuse and historic preservation. They can potentially have community resilience hubs or places that can serve as both community gathering spaces and emergency response and preparedness locations. The current plan identifies 7 crossroads communities, though it does not have a clear definition, and community input has reinforced the need to look at how these communities are designated. During engagement, we heard interest in small-scale businesses or services in some Crossroads communities, such as medical services and healthcare, country stores, small grocery stores, community centers, post offices, fire rescue stations, and parks. A general preference to have input on what community members would like to see in their specific Crossroads community prior to any changes to underlying zoning and by right uses. Esmont, Scottsville, North Garden, Earlysville, Keene, and several other communities were asked to be considered for Crossroads designation. Overall support for community resilience hubs with a preference to use existing buildings and to include classes, food access, senior and youth programming, and emergency shelters. We wanted to note that during the commission's April meeting, the commission asked the AC 44 team to better define what would be included with services in the rural area. The service aspect of Crossroads communities would be focused primarily on health, well-being, safety, and emergency preparedness. Public water and sewer would not be expected in Crossroads communities. The commission also discussed the importance of preserving historical and cultural resources, even those resources that are not visible from roadways or publicly accessible, and that support may be needed for adaptive reuse of historic structures, such as historic tax credits or other means, and that underrepresented histories in the county should be recognized, including through the Historic Markers Program. So there are two options for this topic, and the first is no change to the current plan recommendations. Future steps could include engagement with the 7 current Crossroads communities to delineate those boundaries and to implement the zoning ordinance updates that are recommended in the current plan. Option 2 is to have a clear definition of Crossroads communities and apply the definition during AC 44 to have an updated list of communities. This could also include a narrative in the comprehensive plan that highlights the histories of several of the communities. There would also be recommendations for the community resilience hubs and historic preservation of existing buildings. Staff is recommending this option as it would provide a clear and consistent definition for Crossroads communities across the rural area and would also encourage the resilience hubs. Community input indicated support for those resilience hubs, and staff from Fire Rescue and the Virginia Department of Health are interested in pursuing these hubs in both the development areas and the rural area, especially as they are becoming more common across the country, are important for building resilience to climate change, and can provide more equitable access to services and places for gathering. Future steps after AC 44 could include engagement with individual communities to delineate Crossroads boundaries and to identify more detailed desired land uses to inform possible zoning changes. So to summarize, this option is intended to be primarily focused on the historic preservation and community resilience aspects of Crossroads communities, and land use changes do not appear to be needed at this time. So now we'll turn it over to the commission for discussion.
Okay, so we'll start off with the staff recommendation of option 2. And we will see what your pleasure is and begin a discussion. So if you want to go ahead and make your distinctions, and Commissioner Moore, if you want to vocally chime in, that would be great.
I would hold up a green card.
Okay, awesome.
Make him talk and make him talk.
Let's go to him.
Well, we can certainly switch up the order here, and Commissioner Murray, if you'd like to get the conversation started.
Yeah, so my concern with option 2 is mainly a lot of the uses that are listed here. And this staff mentions hardware stores, auto, household goods, banking, restaurants. This would be a pretty significant impact to the rural area. I mean, we do have some of these uses already, in our existing Crossroads communities, but I don't see a compelling need to change those. I don't see a compelling need to do anything except acknowledge that those are already there. I think some of these are very problematic. For example, auto. For example, it may seem like an auto repair shop or a gas station might be a good thing. We've had those in the past, certainly in the rural area. But the problem is that when there's a leaking fuel tank or when someone's dumping oil into a nearby stream, they notice it when it happens in the growth area. It doesn't get noticed in the rural area. So contamination issues don't get addressed. An example of this, in Crozet, there was there's been reports of, contamination of a stream next to a gas station in Crozet. That was noticed. If that same situation had happened in Batesville, it would not have been noticed until it was a serious contamination issue that required, the EPA. Some of these other things like, restaurants, those are really high water use situations, and I think that really, I think would drastically change the character of our rural area. So I mean, that's what I have to say in terms of. Now, I would say there are some things that I would not be opposed to. You talked about emergency services within reason. I think I would not be opposed to small family practice or access to some kind of medical. There's a huge need for family practice physicians. I would not be opposed to that myself. I'd be opposed to a large practice, but a single office somewhere, a single dentist office, I would not be opposed to that. I think this whole dialogue about providing services to the rural area, it's very important to realize, as I've said in other conversations, the primary use of the rural area is not for residential use. So in providing services, the past comprehensive plan says pretty explicitly that the way that our primary method of controlling sprawl into the rural areas is by restricting services. So if now we're talking about changing that, now providing services to the rural area, we're undermining the primary thing that's keeping the rural area rural. Even something that sounds like a good idea, like a new fire station, I don't think we would do that. But if we were to put like a new fire station in a Crossroads community, you can guarantee that that's going to cause development around where that fire station is, because it's going to lower insurance rates. It's going to make it easier for someone to build houses in that area. So you have to be careful.
Who would like to speak next?
I'll say, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Carr.
You can go.
I'll be very brief. I would fundamentally disagree with that approach. Certainly respect that opinion, but would fundamentally disagree with it. I do think that from an equity standpoint, from a climate action standpoint, it doesn't make sense not to have some basic services out there. And I think this notion of linking those basic services, right? If I want to open up a bakery out there and a coffee shop, I should be able to do that. That's okay. I think that supports the rural area. To say that that is a direct connection to keeping the rural area rural, to me, I'm not drawing that connection. I fundamentally disagree with that, but I'll let other commissioners speak. So.
All right, so I'll just plus one what you just said. That's basically what I was gonna say. I think that a lot of people live in the rural area and they're not all farmers. There are a lot of, I live in a community, if you go down the Harrodsville Turnpike from where it starts, you will find many people living down that road that are on 2-acre lots, 3-acre lots, some are on 1-acre lots. They're not, families that want to have a home where they can afford to live, tradesmen, teachers, firemen, a lot of these people, they live out in the rural area. I live out in the rural area. And the sustainability comments that were made earlier, if I have to drive my car, 45 minutes each direction, spend 90 minutes driving just to get an oil change, that's not necessarily supporting our climate action goals. I think we should spend some time, and not tonight, elucidating what are some of those things that those centers could provide. I agree with you, I wouldn't say we need more restaurants in the rural area. But if you look at, I've brought this up before, Crossroads, that's what it's called, Crossroads Store, but they have a bank, they have a doctor's office, they have a pizza place, they had a laundromat for a while, they don't have that anymore. There's the post office there's the fire station there are a number of small businesses operating there that are providing local jobs. So it still remains relatively compact. It's not, and part of that is because we don't have the zoning around it to allow people to put more stuff, but they fit a lot of services in a very tight footprint. And, that kind of model, I could support that. And, with more people working at home too, like I know on the list it said such as dry cleaners. Okay, look, nobody goes to dry cleaners anymore. All the dry cleaners have, well, there's, well, you're the dapper guy. A number of them have closed, and I used to use them too. I used to take my silk blouses to the dry cleaner. No, a lot of them have closed down. It's not a common need, necessarily in the rural area, but let's not get into that, what uses. But with people working at home, like I had to just drive from Scottsville to Charlottesville because I needed to copy a document for a bid, and it had to be 80 pages and it had to be scanned and If wouldn't it have been nice if I could have accessed a copy machine closer than a 40-minute drive?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of ridiculous. So there are small, compact things that could go on. If anyone has been to the doctor's offices at Crossroads, there's 3 physicians there, nurses, nursing assistants, all of this stuff serving lots of people in an incredibly tiny footprint. If you've been to that office. So I think we can, within reason, provide some of these things that allow people who can't afford to just live in Charlottesville area to be able to access some of these services. I understand your point about gas stations and leaking tanks. There's a lot tighter restrictions than there used to be on how gas stations dispose of things, how they store things. But a small scale type shop, I would not have a problem with that. I'm sorry I talked too long.
No,
Like I said, it's one of my passionate points.
You saved me time, so
Thank you.
can I just do some pluses to hers?
Okay, did you
So
want that?
plus number 1 was concentrated. You said the word concentrated. I think that's key, right? We're not talking about the sprawl that goes out beyond. Second thing is, it is called Crossroads for a reason. There are there's crossroads there. Third thing is, you mentioned this too, the regulations on gas stations and automobile. Honestly, I've seen so much degradation to streams in rural areas caused by farming that it seems to me that there's more regulations on gas stations than there are on farms in some cases. I think that, or at least maybe there aren't more regulations, but they're at least being followed more carefully. I don't know, I'm speculating. But the other thing is, potentially working from home. There are more people working from home. Having that close by, I think, is going to be potentially important. And the last thing, I just have a question. And this is why is Crossroads Plank and 29 not a crossroads?
And the other one is.
Because it wasn't historic. This weird studies, like these were historic crossroads communities. So because Clovesville has an apple packing plant.
I see, so that's
the second leg of 29 slicing through it really hurt it.
Because I feel
That
like what we're
isn't-
talking about is
right,
modeled by a
and we-
crossroads store.
Yeah, and it's interesting to know this. Howardsville was a crossroads community.
Exactly why.
We used to repair bateaus there.
Oh, yeah.
That was a really long time ago.
Yeah.
We still have a great general store. We still all walk to it. Some people, and we have a little gas station, but nobody would suggest that that's a crossroads
Right,
because it's,
interesting.
we're not moving by bateau anymore. So it isn't, the fact that it's historic is basically irrelevant. That's why it's not on the list of places to be a crossroads. So that's why I think we need to, we brought it up that the list needs a lot of work.
Needs to be updated.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about the list.
Right.
No, but
No,
Right.
the recommendation does.
The option does say refresh the list.
Does, yep.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
We're
We're not
We're not refreshing it today, but
Right.
it does.
Yeah, I'm supportive.
Okay. That's all you're gonna say?
Yes.
That's all you're gonna say? Am I Nathan, is Nathan saying something?
Commissioner Moore?
I was not, but I could.
don't have
No, look,
Don't feel called.
This feels like the least controversial of our four things. And with all due respect to Commissioner Murray, I also and with due respect to notions about any petroleum product, because I know how much ACSA still has to monitor some former gas station sites. I think this one makes just a ton of sense. That's all I got.
So now I will say something. This community sort of swirls around historic. That's like a big word for us. Everything's historic here. The thing is that not necessarily these, but some of the ones that have been put in, like Esmont and places like that, are in fact historic crossroad communities. These were places that at one point in our history as a community, people gathered, they went there, they did all of the things that communities did. Because our lives became what they became, those communities have gone small. If we could say, for instance, Esmont could be reinvigorated because of the Keene Convenience Center, the post office, the veterinarian, there's a big vet down there.
And the school's been turned into a community center.
So you've got this place here that in fact we could begin to recreate or put the elements together for community. That is a really big piece for me right now, because when we talk about the densification of the urban area, we are by subtraction leaving those communities outside of that area that predate all of that stuff, that predate the crossroads of 29 and Hydraulic Road. They were there being the part of Albemarle County that all these folks got attracted to. And they've created something else, which happens. And so for me, part of the sort of investment in the crossroad community is like going home again, not to Walton Mountain, but going home again, where that we can sort of invest in those communities and say, you're a rich part of who we are as a community. And so for me, I would love to be able to say, I'm going to Esmont and having lunch out there. I'd love to be able to do that. I'd love to be able to sort of say that there are options, and this is no offense to those people we're going to. I'd like to have an option that was not winery based. That we could do, or that's not equestrian based. That's a reason, but that was about who we were as a community. And I think for me, this is going back, but going forward to Albemarle County. So I'm full up in this thing here.
It's a great way to look at it, really.
Well, I mean, as a former Batesville resident, we're talking about the Batesville story. I was and am supportive of the changes that happened there that have revitalized that store. There was a lot of challenges they faced though in terms of septic and other things to make that possible, parking. And I think there's also been a past history in the county of well-intentioned efforts to enable things we want and inadvertently creating loopholes that allow someone to drive a Mack truck through them. And I think,
could you give us a for instance on that? Because I'm
like the water protection ordinance, for example. I think that we've created situations where people can grossly exploit our ordinances to put things that are not appropriate in places they shouldn't be. And so I guess a lot of my concern is about scale, is about, when you say you're going to allow restaurants, well, what does that mean? What do we mean by restaurant? If you say a country store, well, we're allowing country stores and we're allowing restaurants, does that mean a Cracker Barrel? Is a Cracker Barrel appropriate now?
A Cracker Barrel will never, so to bring you
They
back
probably
from
would
that
never
example,
do that, but
that's never gonna happen, just like we're never gonna get an Olive Garden. It ain't gonna happen.
There was somebody who wanted to put a Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, that was a different kind of Cracker Barrel. And so that's not gonna happen here. But there is a way in which you can say to someone who may be a small entrepreneur, I think you were talking about a bakery.
That was me.
Yeah, it was a bakery. That I am in fact in the country store gonna sort of reach out to Sally Lou, and Sally Lou's gonna have her muffins there.
yeah, I'm not opposed to that.
And so I think, remember, there really is this thing called the free market, there's the market forces. No market force is gonna turn Esmont into some Dollywood. It ain't gonna happen. That might happen in Scottsville, but it ain't gonna happen in Esmont.
So I think part of what I'm hearing from Commissioner Murray is how do we define this? And is there, or are we just saying, you know, and what at least the way I understood the option that we're voting for here, or I guess we're not voting, but we're acknowledging, is that it gives us the opportunity to do that.
It does,
Better
absolutely,
define.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there is that dialogue that's, I mean, if I'm understanding it right, that is what we're talking about. Because before, there wasn't that clarity, we didn't have that clarity.
Right, I
And
think
so
there's
now
just
we're able to
some
do that.
real angst about just saying like, they're historic, so therefore, you know, like
I'm not saying that.
Batesville is a great example, and that's in my district.
That's right.
Batesville, I will tell you, there's no more room to put any stuff in
That's right.
downtown Batesville, but that store,
That's it.
and that's fine. And they like it, and it's great, and that's that.
And it creates community.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's,
It
and
creates
that's all there
community.
is, folks,
Yeah.
as Bugs Bunny said.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's it for Batesville. We're not gonna designate Batesville as a crossroads hub, blah, blah, whatever it is we're saying.
But it could be a community.
It is a community. We
Right.
don't need to
Very-
say it.
Very much so, yeah.
We don't need to anoint that Batesville is a community with a community center to it. But we're not going to be proposing anything else goes in Batesville.
There's no room.
And there's some angst about Keene. Yes, we put our convenience center there, there's a post office there, there happens to be a veterinarian in an old building that was, you know, adaptively used by the vet. But I hear a lot from my constituents that they don't want that to be then, therefore like, let's go Keene and let's put all this stuff there. Sorry, I forgot the gas station. So anyway, there's good little hub of stuff there, but is that the place where we wanna expand just because it's on Route 20? I'm not, so we're not getting into stuff tonight. We're
But
not
then you
getting
have the
into.
people from Esmont who say, would it be helpful from just on.
Oh, yeah, the people from Esmont, I went to the
You
comp
went to the
planning
meeting,
meeting
that's
in Esmont, and there was a lot of support for that, and also older people saying things like, why can't we have some apartments here? I can't
Keep us here.
Yeah, we wanna stay in our community, we don't have to move to Charlottesville to assisted living that we can never afford anyway.
I will say, one thing I would add to staff's recommendation for this is, unless it's in here and I just didn't see it, is that any review of a crossroads community or a community hub needs to have some form of traffic study built into it, because Crossroads, that intersection of 29 and Plank is dangerous.
Yes.
So as we think about developing those areas, even, you know, concentrating those areas, we're gonna be concentrating traffic and turning movements at intersections. And I think it just needs to be woven into this process.
So let me come alongside you on that. So I just saw a study that they use cell phone pinging off of towers in a particular area. Just to determine how many people drove through, or whether or not people stayed in the area, and if people stayed, then they looked at what are they staying to do. And it wasn't, for me at least, it was an interesting use of technology that wasn't invasive, because you couldn't tell it was all of us. But what they just said, how many people are actually coming through here?
Yeah.
And are they staying here, you know, they go to the post office, or they go to the convenience center, or what are they doing, how long are they staying in this particular area? Which might be helpful to try and get a sense of, is everybody just driving through, because they're on the way to XYZ place? Are they actually spending a moment there doing something?
Well, I was thinking that, but also traffic calming, you know, the intersection, the turning movements off of 29 south and northbound at Plank Road has gone from a yield sign to a stop sign.
That's right.
Back to a yield sign, and now back to a stop sign. So I guess they're just trying to figure out which one creates less accidents, but.
I mean, I think groundwater is another issue that needs to be considered too. I mean, if there's not gonna be public water, then these are all gonna be off of wells.
That's right.
And, you know, we have a past history in Ivy of running out of water.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I understand that. I mean, I lived in a house that had a 40-foot hand dug well. And you change you figure out how to live with that. Now, I'm not running a business out of that, but at least now I'm not running a business out of that. But, you know, you figure out how to change, and I let's hope that, and I don't have, and this is where I'm looking at Kevin, If someone were to put a business there, I assume they'd have to get a health department, something or other. Oh, maybe I'm looking at part. They'd have to get I see heads moving, to be able to see whether or not they've got enough water flow there, and it's not, just gonna be,
Feasibility.
to see whether or not I can do enough, what is it, liters per, it's not liters, it's somewhere else. Gallons per minute? Gallons per minute to get there, but that's to go to your point, that it's not like, I know that there's a bunch of stuff in our county that feels like the Wild Wild West. But I don't think the new stuff that will be coming to the county can have that ability anymore. That there actually are a group of people who are saying, this doesn't work here for you, not for you personally, but this idea does not work in this location because you don't perk. That famous restaurant on going into Crozet, that was a famous.
Where the shell.
Yeah, it was a famous French restaurant in our area when I first moved here. They sold it and it got grandfathered in. They sold it, the person who thought it was gonna put another great French restaurant in there couldn't get the water to flow. So it sat empty for I don't know how many years, probably 30 years. It's still empty, it's been renovated, but it's still empty because they don't have any water. They don't have any water and sewage. And I think we'll see the same thing out in various places if we move forward. Plus, some people may not come. Remember that. Just because you say it's a crossroads community doesn't mean people are gonna go.
Are you all ready to make a recommendation to pass on to the board? And we have your comments here, and Vlad is finishing up the comments.
I mean, I'll just say too, that as just a last comment, there's a big difference between keeping the special use permit process, which allows some of these things to occur, and saying we're gonna do away with the special use permit process and make them by right. And so.
It would be by right. They could still be allowed, they could be enumerated as appropriate for that area by special use permit.
And I
And
would
they
be
would still
okay
have to go through that.
I would be okay with that, but there were some notes in the staff report that suggested additional by right uses.
Okay.
And that's what concerns me the most. If we're talking about special use permits, I'm okay with that. If we're talking about by right, I think I'm concerned.
So how would you all imagine the recommendation that you would bring to the board?
Is it fair to say we're getting that kind of detail later on? Or?
Yes, absolutely. We can cover that detail as we move forward. Tori, could you clarify what we discussed about by right uses in the staff report? Do you remember?
Yeah, so just to, I guess, kind of overall clarify this option, this is really saying to have a clear definition of crossroads communities and apply that in part to recognize those communities and encourage the historic preservation aspect and kind of lift up some of those, underrepresented narratives, and then also help identify places that could be community hubs using, existing community facilities. And in the future, possibly doing extra engagement to go to individual communities and say, are you interested in changes to, land use or zoning to allow some of these other uses, but not doing that during the AC 44 process. So whatever's allowed by right today is just what's allowed.
You brought that up, and I don't know exactly where it said it, but in the narrative was just talking about kind of like checking in with the immediate neighbors. I'm all for.
We heard, yeah.
I'm all for, okay, and I understand, I'm all for that. But I want to be careful that we're not, we're trying to make a plan for the county. And we can't say, well, 5 neighbors didn't want this, so there will not be any services provided for the community that lives around that area because the neighbor next door doesn't want it.
And doing a, more in-depth study of individual communities could also help kind of weed out some of those uses that may not be appropriate in a certain community, whether it's traffic or groundwater, whatever the issue might be, versus just a blanket,
I don't
this
wanna,
use everywhere.
just say a list like, these are the things that go.
Right.
Here's 8 of those areas, all 10 of those things can go in there. I think that's.
Right.
Commissioner Moore, were you adding something?
I was just gonna say, feel the room is still yes, I would recommend this from my room.
Thank you. All right, so are we ready to move on to have your concerns been?
I'm still a no on it, but I'm not gonna hold you up.
I think we've noted, everyone's concerns, so the sum total of this is substantial agreement but with substantial concerns too, so.
I don't have
Well,
substantial,
I think that's a fair
I
assessment.
don't have substantial concern. I think there are issues that need to be fleshed out.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I would not want my comments to be put into a category of substantial concerns. I will be substantially concerned if we don't do it.
Yeah, I think it's general consensus for sure, but Commissioner Murray, we have some things we need to probably wrestle with in terms of the nuts and bolts.
Right.
Yes.
Right, right.
The nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I mean,
Good clarification.
I'm not at the point where I could say I support that without knowing the details.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Thank you.
I think the last comment is trying to be a summary one for several of these, you know, the general consensus. So.
Yeah, sure.
Are we ready to move to topic number 4?
Oh my gosh.
Grand finale.
Oh my gosh, it's the Cracker Barrel and
Now we can have a Cracker
an
Barrel.
Olive Garden conversation. I'm going to Cracker
I think an Arby's at every exit, right? That's what's happening.
That's right, Arby's a different exit. That's right.
All right, we're gonna round home.
As everyone's guessed, we're talking about rural interstate interchanges. So these are interchanges that are identified in the current plan as I-64 interchanges that are located in the rural area. The current plan recommends land uses that support agriculture and forestry at the rural interchanges without public water and sewer available, and only identifies Shadwell as being an option for a higher intensity of development. The Shadwell and Yancey Mills interchanges have existing commercial and industrial development. These rural interchanges also have existing zoning districts that allow for by right commercial and industrial development, which is not consistent with the current plan's land use recommendations. Allowing non-residential development at some rural interstate interchanges could provide space for new or expanding businesses in a way that makes efficient use of land and infrastructure by concentrating these uses adjacent to the interstate. It should be noted that agribusiness and food processing is a target industry identified by the current comp plan for rural interstate interchanges. During engagement, we heard a variety of comments both in favor of and against possible changes to rural interstate interchange recommendations, with a fairly even split among the community members who responded directly to the question of whether or not changes should be made. Those concerned with changes cited the possibility of additional traffic and pollution, pressure for more growth, impacts to scenic and historic resources, and potential impacts to groundwater supplies. Those in support of changes identified employment-generating industries as a preferred land use, with Shadwell as the highest priority for future commercial and industrial development, and Yancey Mills as the next priority. At the April Commission meeting, several commissioners expressed interest in further discussing the rural interstate interchanges, though there was concern that the board may decide not to move forward with updated recommendations for this topic. So there are two options for this topic, and the first is to keep the current plan recommendations with a possible future step of a small area plan for the Shadwell interchange based on the recommended land uses in the current plan. The second option is during AC 44 to draft high-level recommendations for the Shadwell and Yancey Mills interchanges for general land uses, transportation needs, protection of natural resources, and infrastructure needs to guide future small area plans. There would be no changes to land use designations during AC 44. Staff is recommending this option as there is existing development and by right commercial and industrial development potential at both Shadwell and Yancey Mills. The land use build-out analysis found very few locations in the development areas close to being site ready for newer expanding businesses, and allowing some additional development at these interchanges supports efficient use of land and existing infrastructure. After AC 44, future steps can include a small area plan for the Shadwell interchange and a small area plan for the Yancey Mills interchange, with Shadwell prioritized. Future small area plans would allow for a more in-depth study of these interchanges and for additional community, commission, and board input during the small area plan process. So now we'll turn it over to the commission for discussion.
Thanks, Tori. So once again, we have our cards. The option for topic 4 is option 2. That's the recommendation from staff. And use your cards to express where you are with it. And Commissioner Moore?
I'm gonna hold up a green card today on this one.
Somebody stole my green card. It's like we've had enough of him. I found it.
Okay, awesome. So, all right, so let's start with the yellow, red.
Honey, you wanna go first?
Sure. You know, there's a lot of concern in Crozet, particularly about the Yancey Mills area. There's been past proposals to expand the growth area or add some additional uses in that space. As the comprehensive plan says, we want uses that support agriculture in the rural area, and that's exactly what Yancey Mills is doing right now. It's providing a great service that does support the rural area. And it's great for climate change as well, because if you have to take your trees to be processed in some other locality, you're trucking those trees over in some other place. So this is a consistent thing. Now, if we add additional, more profitable uses, it's probably going to drive that lumber mill out of business. They're probably going to say, you know, it'd be more profitable if we close this and make it something else. The other concern that Crozet has is that they're really trying to attract businesses to downtown Crozet. And if we expand a bunch of uses around the interchange, then there's a lot of fear that it's going to pull attention away from Crozet and towards the interchange. And that's already kind of happening, because a lot of the existing uses that are already sort of grandfathered uses that are already here. I have, you know, as with the Crossroads communities, I have some concerns about some of the uses that were suggested. I think, you know, the devil's in the details here. I think there are ways that I could support expanded uses. I'm actually in support of tourism uses at those along those interchanges. I don't know why with the past reservation about not wanting tourism I think that's free money. I don't know why we're turning that away.
That's free what?
It's
Oh,
free money.
Free money, okay.
It's free money. I mean, they come here, they spend their money, they leave. Why do we not want that? You know, so, and it's consistent with rural area values, in my opinion. You know, also anything that supports the rural area in terms of there's a lot of things I think should be by right that are agricultural support light industrial. And we don't really have a zoning category for this. I wish I don't know if it's possible to create one for it, but you know, things like canning facilities, things like small scale meat processing.
There was a guy that wanted to dry hops. And he had
Dry
to go through a
hops.
really complicated process.
Yeah, so
Or just a shed to put some hops.
yeah, those things should be by right. They should be by right. We should encourage them at those places, because we want to, if we, you know, I'm in full support of that. I said I'm in full support of tourism type activities.
Could you say what that might, could just a few, like 1 or 2 or 3?
Sure. I think I'm not opposed to the fact that we have a campground in Crozet. I mean, well, near Crozet. I know there's some controversy with some neighbors around that campground. I'm not opposed to that as a use. I'm not opposed to some of the there's some river accesses not too far from interchanges, you know, and you know, I think if someone was to rent kayaks or had some sort of use related to the river there, I would not be opposed to that as a great use of our, you know, that area. So I think the question for me is the use consistent with our rural area values and purposes, you know? And if it is, then I'm okay with it. But if it's subverting that primary intention of the rural area, then I'm not for it.
Can I ask a clarifying question to what you're saying?
Sure.
Because that's why I know you held up the yellow and a red.
Mhm.
Most of what I just heard you say was more yellow than red, and I guess your key concern is in option 2, where it talks about commercial and or office flex research and development light industrial uses, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in there like bioscience and medical devices.
Yeah, so you're focused more on those specific uses.
Yeah, I mean,
But you're
that's-
not against the development of that
Yeah.
interchange.
I'm not against the development of interchange. In fact, I would say that by identifying things that we would want there
Yeah, got it.
proactively, we may avoid some of the things that may be more concerning coming up in the future. And we may be able to, keep some of the uses we want in that area. But I am concerned about some things that are listed here, bioscience and medical devices. And
Where
I'm
would this
concerned
go
about-
in the county?
Huh?
Where would those uses go in the county? Where would they be better served?
Well, I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think we've had a past history of areas being zoned for light industrial and then converted to residential use. And to me, it's much like the conversation that we had before, whereas we say, well, we have this growth area, and but we've been very wasteful with it. And now people say, well, since we've been wasteful for it, well, now let's talk about expanding the growth area. I think there's a very similar conversation that we had about light industrial sites, is that we've been very wasteful with our light industrial sites. And now we've said, oh, well, we've used those up, let's go ahead and you need to make more of them for us. Well, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we need to hold the line on some of this so that we don't, keep, losing these sites. I think until we can demonstrate that people are using the light industrial sites that we have, maybe we should be adding more.
So I would offer some of the light industrials, so the historic light industrial sites were on roads that were major roads. And then it changed. Crozet had a wonderful history of canning at the Del Monte plant there. That's now a records plant or whatever. Yeah, and it had some light industrial with Acme files, which I assume the EPA remediation of that's done. So all of those places were on the natural, and then there was the avionics place that was right behind the airport that went in. So all of those places were on significant travel roads, and the travel's changed. And so what we've not been sort of good about is creating opportunities for different kinds of light industrial to come up in those places. And so I think this is not about Crozet, but when I looked at the rural interstates, if you looked at the one that's got at least the most opportunity, it's the Yancey Mill exit. Because I don't know what you could put at Shadwell now that they've redone the road, which is good. But I don't know how you get people to the places, and you've got somebody who wants to put a hardware store there. And I know the gentleman who has where the Coors land is, they've been talking about not Coors land, Coors ice cream place, that sort of stuff over there. They've been wanting to do something. So there isn't a lot of space there to do things around that exit. Whereas thoughtfully, as I think what you're saying, is that there is perhaps a thoughtful way, in fact, to use an area that is a major east-west corridor, transportation corridor for us, that would at least put something in a way that's not going to compete or overburden the more residential or rural part of the county around there. I mean, we've got to figure out. I think we're being called to figure out a way to accommodate, and also accommodate where there is a natural way to get people in and out of here without having to push them onto to push them through the community. I mean,
The small area plan development start to uncover some of that?
It would, if that's part of this.
I thought that was part of
It is
it
part of,
too.
it is part of this, because I just think what's gonna happen is that we have allowed a very particular agribusiness to grow up, particularly in that part of the county. And we don't have a lot of stuff that supports it. I would have to send, if I were to sort of do. If I look at the other places that I know that have viticulture, there's a whole suite of things that are lined up with them. We have none of those things out there. They're not there. And so I don't know how we figure that out.
What do you mean by the suite of things, like lodging, or what are you talking?
Well, there's some lodging,
Yeah.
but there's also the people who supply the wineries. There's, if I don't have if I don't want my own bottling, I can send it to a different place that will bottle it. Now, some
Right.
people are doing that because they have excess capacity, but there isn't what I would call the ecosystem around viticulture.
Right.
That you go when you go to other places in the world, that they're there. But it's really
Right.
only about growing grapes and having lovely views.
I would say that's agricultural support. I mean, I would say, I'd say if we're gonna say grapes are agriculture. what do
Which
we
they
do?
are, which they are.
Yeah, then what are we doing to support that industry of people growing grapes in Albemarle County?
Or supplying them.
And if, and we have a lot of cattle in Albemarle County, but they
We
have.
don't have that much cattle. So that's a place that I got beat up by the
But like,
farm
if you
division.
wanna get your meat processed, you take it to Harrisburg.
That's right, or you take it to Madison.
And,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
most
take it
people
away.
I know that are running their own beef, chickens and whatever are going to Harrisburg.
It's gonna have some.
That's
Now-
where they have to go, there's nowhere.
and that's inhumane for the gross of your opinions of eating meat. It's inhumane for the cows, and it's bad for climate change to be able to.
The whole 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards. My grandparents had a feed mill.
No.
We don't even have a place for, so I think there's all these industries that support agriculture. And if we're serious about having agriculture in Albemarle County, we need to be able to have the places that do that, to support that.
Okay, I'll follow up since I was in the same curricular group. So, yeah. I look at the list that the county has for the things like business and financial services, defense and security, blah, blah. This is the very, I could say lazy, I'll just say generalized list that came out of the economic planning process that was subpar. So we didn't get, our county did not receive the kind of economic development plan that I would have liked us to receive. We didn't get our value out of that. And so we have this very general list, food processing. We had this argument about Deschutes is beer food. Yes, it was defined as food during the process, so it met a core industry. And I'll stop harping on that, but I don't believe that just because we have an interchange, every time we see, this is another planning lens, every time you see an interchange, we should have economic development there. I actually really like it when I get off the highway and there's rural area. I'm not in, there are other counties that every single interchange has got Arby's and this and that, a gas station and, and all this stuff. That just destroys the character. I don't know why we would want to promote more blobs of development just because we have an interchange. Yes, it's good for transporting factory goods, but we already have talked about the fact with industries that we don't have enough flat, inexpensive land for them to want to put a lot of those type of businesses in our county. So it's not an attractive place. It's not going to realize the economics we think it is. I support what you just said about having things there that do help the agricultural areas or the rural area uses, like the lumber mill makes sense there. Because you can get your truck on and off quickly, you can deliver to the mill, they can get supplies there, and workers can get to work. But, unless it's something that actually has to do with supporting the rural area, then I'm not in favor. I'm just, and I guess the other thing I'll say is, when you look at some of these tech firms, we want the tech firms, they've got the equipment, we can tax it, we can get lots of revenue, they have high paid jobs, we can get lots of revenue from that. They don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere. That model is dead. We just approved so I don't know, bio something or other facility building that is looking to be built and have tenants. But where is that? That is near Charlottesville. All right, in Albemarle County, in the southern area. But it's near town because their workers that they want to attract are not going to be excited about jumping on and off the highway as much as they are going to get a beer on the mall after work or going to one of our lovely wineries or whatever they do. So they're not looking to be out at a highway interchange. So I guess, that, just to think about the industries we want to attract, what those kind of workers want in their work environment. But I don't think the answer is highway interchange necessarily, okay? I mean, a lot of big office parks have been built out in rural areas, not in this county, but in other places. And guess what? Those are dead because the workers are like, there's nowhere to get a sandwich. I can't go get my dry cleaning done for my Dapper outfit. Like whatever it is that I can't drop my kids off at daycare. I hate it. So they're having trouble renting these, and this was predating COVID. So I'm gonna be like more of a mauve, like yeah, I thought it'd be different. I'm not, I'm not 100% red. I'm saying that there are some things that are appropriate there, but I don't think this list from the county's past economic report is the list. And I also appreciate the fact that we've had this debate in the county many times. We did not just take every interchange and say, hey, let's put some sprawl there. So I'm gonna step down off my soapbox.
That's pretty high.
I know, but this is, for the people who've lived here for decades, this is an argument that comes up time and again. So we've had this argument over and over and over again. And I'm not saying that nothing can go there, but I just think it's sort of like, oh, there's an interchange, let's put stuff there.
Can I ask staff a question, clarifying question? So I think this is a question for you. I'm a little confused because your staff recommendation says option 2, add recommendations for, and then it says specifically commercial and/or office, flex, research and development, light industrial uses. Right, so you're pretty specific there about Shadwell and Yancey Mills. And then it talks in the subsequent paragraphs, talks about the small area plans, where it says, with this option, separate planning efforts such as small area plans would be recommended for Shadwell and Yancey Mills to provide detailed guidance for land uses and infrastructure needs for future development. You're not saying there, office, flex, research and development. That's a general kind of catch-all thing. And then 3 paragraphs down, if this option 2 is pursued, staff would develop comprehensive plan recommendations through AC 44 for the general land uses, transportation needs protection. So again, it's pretty general. And then 2 paragraphs down, small area plans, et cetera. Is it fair to say that could you still achieve the same option by removing those specific references under option 2, or are you specifically asking for our input relative to commercial and/or office flex research?
That's a good question. I think I can answer it. So the option 2, kind of as it stands is, general high level, like, yes, we think that commercial and industrial flex type of things could be appropriate here, which we could then through AC 44 get into a little more detail on what those could include. But you all could also, modify that option and say, we think right now only, X, Y, and Z uses would be more appropriate here. So we wouldn't, through AC 44, we wouldn't get into any of the actual parcel specific, like this one's purple, this one's red, but it would be more with a small area plan. These are the types of things that would be appropriate at this interchange.
And it's potentially true that out of that small area plan, I mean, this is an extreme, none of those that you mentioned under option 2 would fit.
That's right.
That's the beautiful thing about it.
Okay,
So
that's where I think we're getting too hung up on the specifics.
I would agree.
And then if we start thinking more generally, like, is it worth looking at those 2 areas for future development? Let's do it. Let's focus the lens a little more. We may learn more as opposed to not doing it.
Can I just clarify what
Yeah.
you're saying is that that we would have a small area plan that may actually say the current uses are actually appropriate. Let's not, or we
Let's not
don't
mess with them.
recommend,
Yeah,
the
let's not
recommendation is not to add any additional uses.
Correct.
That's an outcome, right?
Yeah, that could absolutely be an outcome.
That's my green card for you, Kevin, if that was it.
I agree. That's what I think we're talking about.
But we only get there if we do an analysis of it.
Exactly. That's right. See, if you don't do an analysis, you don't know
Right.
if it is or isn't.
Right.
But the problem is the way it's phrased right now. It says recommendation for commercial and/or office flex research and development. Like you struck all that stuff.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's what
That's gotta
Yeah.
be.
Add recommendations, period. Is that what you're saying?
Or something, because then you talk about, oh, and then we're
Fill in
gonna
the
actually
blank.
focus on whether or not any of that's really legit.
Yeah, I mean-
And what else.
Well, I think
So
there's a
maybe-
lot that's not legit there. That's what I was trying to get at.
But
Can
you
I make
won't
a-
know it until you.
Can I make a recommendation? Because it's getting late. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. I've been up for a while
Uh-oh,
and flew in from Atlanta. So not that it's any of your faults, but I want to
it
make
is
sure.
my fault.
I want to make sure that we're not just talking in circles. Is it fair to say that we think these areas are worthy of exploration for feasibility as presented in the staff report? And we're not gonna tie anybody's hands, but we'll go through that process to see what might be appropriate versus not appropriate.
So can I propose some language? I would,
Wait, he's
oh,
got-
sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Yellow hasn't spoken.
I think there's a reason why I was yellow, because so I get to your point, well. I agree with the language that was too specific on some of these uses that may not be appropriate for some areas, and of course, as we dive into a more careful study of those areas, you can identify, and I agree with that, except,
Uh-oh.
and I'm hoping if anything tonight, I'm consistent. If anything. So the Yancey Mills area in particular, so I don't think these are equal.
No, they're not equal.
No, they're
I agree-
completely
I agree.
different in places.
And so
Completely.
Stop.
we do have an
I agree with my
area
colleague.
in Crozet that the businesses keep closing
In Crozet?
in Crozet.
Okay.
So we're having a hard time getting commercial.
Oh, okay, okay. All right.
So again, this is how we dilute a current development area by start to create another center, right? I mean,
Right,
we're
like,
not calling it a
don't put your
center, but it's-
biomedical thing in Crozet, put it out at the interchange.
Correct. So why do we, and what are we gonna add there? We got 3 gas stations right next to each other
In at this interchange.
at this intersection.
Right.
We
Wouldn't be
have
a
a
gas
service station,
Yeah.
or a mechanics.
Yeah.
No, we got the mill,
Yeah. Big
right? We have a brewery,
no, do we?
yes,
Yeah.
right there.
But you also have a
And so
historic
how,
neighborhood
you have
Across the
a
street.
historic cemetery,
across the
Yeah.
street.
you have a historic neighborhood, you have a historic church.
Yeah.
So how far does this go and why do we need this there? So I guess back to Karen's point is, every time we have an intersection, we gotta do a small area plan. I mean, I think our staff has a lot to do.
Yeah, we're
Why
trying
are
to
we
help you out.
spending the time in doing
Yeah.
this for Yancey Mills, which doesn't need it?
Amen.
So that's why I'm a yellow. Shadwell, I think Shadwell needs it, because I don't know what's going on there.
Well, I can tell you what's going on.
And so I think there is.
But let me back up on your counterpoint, though. Your counterpoint is because we have this vacant square in Crozet that's gonna be developed at some point in time, we shouldn't put anything there that challenges its development. So I'm not aware, I know it's going through, because I've read some of the ARB or AR, whatever that thing's called, ASR, whatever thing. So it's going through, but it's not, I'm not convinced that anything's gonna be there that's not gonna be precious. And so that's my concern about the square in Crozet. That yes, it's gonna get developed out, but are you gonna see a boutique hotel? I think that plan has gone, because people don't wanna deal with that, when there's some foolishness about that. I'm not sure that even if we were to say, which, and I was hoping we'd get to this, I'd like to see us do something and look at, even though the government's kicked them aside, some opportunity zones. And say, and this goes to you, what's the economic benefit of this particular location? The Crozet Square would be one of them. What are we gonna do there? Because everything that I've read over the last few years, it's more of, it's not essential business. And it may be many small businesses, which is fine. I love small businesses. I was one.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we're going to put anything there that's going to make an impact in people's travel time, significant in their daily travel time. And so should we be having an economic discussion about, should that be an opportunity zone to attract the kinds of things that you're trying to attract?
Absolutely should be.
Yeah, I agree with
I mean,
that.
that in conversation with infrastructure.
And the same thing about,
But what, to almost every single option that's been recommended adds more work to staff.
oh, I agree with that. And so they'll,
All of it. And
the lady in the back will say, you know what, they'll start doing a prioritization of this.
And-
But we shouldn't be doing the prioritization.
But at the same time, when there's areas that, what is it about Yancey Mills that needs the intervention?
Every interchange must be developed.
Well, but we've come from, I mean, that's a 180 flip from no exchanges should be
Yeah.
developed.
So that's what I was, I do think Shadwell has, there's gotta be, it will benefit from
a plan,
a plan.
because stuff is there, stuff is happening.
Stuff is there, there's already, and it would benefit from a plan, and there's probably some opportunity to densify that. Yancey Mill is completely different situation.
Can we ask staff what they saw to yield that recommendation, shed some light on it?
Sure, so for both of the Shadwell and Yancey Mills interchanges, there is, existing industrial and commercial development and then also underlying zoning districts that are not rural area. But at the same time, recognizing that, it seems like there's more, potential for possible changes at the Shadwell interchange, and that's also where we've heard more input on. So if both were going to be pursued for a small area plan, we would recommend Shadwell being prioritized, which is also what the current comp plan recommends.
And I would be in favor of that. The other thing I would add about Yancey Mill, there's a lot of family farms along that stretch that will be lost. There
Yes,
are
that's right.
multiple farms that are already being lost because they can't pay their taxes. So they're selling off pieces.
But, so this is a continuation of what we've seen in sort of the fragmentation of what was once agricultural land in the county. And I know someone will say, well, I'm being sort of disrespectful here, but it could possibly be that business model is no longer going to exist in this particular place.
But it has a lot to do with what we put next to it.
But it also has a lot to do with how farming is done and what is the ecosystem for farming in a particular place. Because we go to Augusta County, there's lots of farming in Augusta County right now. Lots of farming, significant farming in Augusta County. And my contention is that the personality of the people who make up Albemarle County aren't farmers per se. And there's where the cultural rub is. That we've drifted to a different kind of blend of personalities where farmers can't necessarily get the kinds of inputs, financial inputs, nor do they have proximity to markets that they once had.
I would encourage you to attend this soil and water conservation meeting sometime so you can meet people who are actively farming in Albemarle County. I think that the opportunity that I see for Yancey Mills, and I apologize for my ignorance on this, but is it possible for us to create our own zoning district that's sort of customized like a light industrial agricultural support?
Yes,
that's a thing
absolutely. We could make an overlay and
We
say,
can do an overlay.
Okay, so
this is what goes there.
So I would say that would be the opportunity that I would say, because there are applications that come before the Planning Commission that I've seen in the past or about where people had to get a special use permit to set up a canning facility or to do X or Y. And having an area where that's by right would be extremely beneficial. I would say it send a signal that we want agricultural support industries in that location.
Jill, mind if I jump in for a sec? Hi. One thing that I feel in this conversation is that a lot of we're really getting in the weeds hard, and I understand why. That's what we do, because we care. But also, what I read in the staff recommendation was, let's see if we can do this thing. Like this is something we're going to study and open up to possibility. And for me, I think some of the objections that got brought up very early in this conversation about traffic feel a little silly because it's an interstate corridor. But also, I want to, I want to respect everybody's views here, but also, I think there's a lot of considerations of what goes where that will be very useful. But I kind of want to just move forward on this idea that we study and do something.
So, I could propose some language. I've said that before. I think I'd be okay with add recommendations for land uses at the Shadwell and Yancey Mills rural interstate interchanges, especially that are supportive of the rural area. Something like that.
I would, sorry, respectfully not agree with that. I would agree with taking those specific items out of
That's what I was trying to say
of
10
option
minutes
two,
ago.
but I think it needs more study.
You mean like the words commercial, office,
Yeah.
light industrial, yeah, that's what
That's what I
my
was saying.
problem is.
Yeah.
And so if you take those out, then we're still studying
We're
it.
still
I
studying
think you gotta study it, and there may be opportunities for something that's more light industrial in those areas that none of us know because we haven't studied it.
Yeah. Or it may be nothing.
not.
It's
Or
nothing.
nothing.
Yeah.
But to say that it has to be focused on rural, I think is limiting.
I'm fine with it. I mean, it's, as I said, my main objection is these specific enumerated things in here.
So something more generalized, like consider additional non-residential uses at these locations, and then the subtext would be the area plan for studies.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a plan around an interchange, I mean, plans are good, right? But
Yep.
it just sounded like a giant development plan, just to like stick stuff at the interchange.
Yeah, I think you might.
Sorry, that's
I think you might be limiting yourself by saying it's just those uses. I think it's better to give yourself options.
what is appropriate at this,
Exactly.
what, if anything, is
Yeah.
appropriate to put here that would
Yeah.
support, I'm still in the camp of support rural uses. But a rural use could be tourism, and it could be a little lodging of some kind
A
that
little
somebody could
lodging,
get to.
Or it could be
I don't know
something
what
that
the
happens
county's hang
there
up
because
is
you
with
got access to
hotels and
infrastructure.
Well, we could have our own separate conversation about that.
Yeah, but that wouldn't do any good.
I would also say that we need to look.
No, I'm serious, we have to have the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah, I know.
Two of you could have.
Wait,
Yeah.
we need to look also to the adjacent communities
Right.
and what's happening
Right.
along, because again, that's not all gonna be the same to all of these. And that's one of my concerns with the Yancey Mill is the Crozet development area that's there. And so Yancey Mill is developing right now. There is actually fairly new businesses that have opened up in the last 4 or 5 years there. In that crossroads.
On 250.
On 250, right, so there are things happening there now, and they will continue. All I'm saying is I think we need to have a lens beyond just that interstate intersection, of what's happening around it.
That's fair.
To inform.
That's fair. That's
To
fair.
inform that plan.
But that's not inconsistent what we're.
Sorry, I was a little.
It is
we're
inconsistent with
myopic
the
and
way
just
the
looking right
options
around
worded.
it. It doesn't say anything about taking into consideration.
No, it just says commercial and office flex, research, development, light industrial land uses at these interchanges. That's what it says.
So what I'm hearing is that there's some agreement around option 2, but there's some editing of the language about the specific uses.
Sorry, I was snappy. I mean, I feel like I said it like 10 minutes ago, and we kind of
You did, Jay. You did.
ran
Jay.
around the horn. I mean, ran around the horn a few times. But I think what we're saying is like it's worthy of study as proposed. Not to call out any specified uses, but let that study inform that feasibility, right? And then per Commissioner Carazana's comment, that study should also be considered what's happening around it, is what I think I'm hearing. And we've been kind of beaten up quite a bit.
I put a red circle around this one. Recommend being less specific with uses in this option and deferring uses to a small area plan.
Is that agreeable? I see a green card and.
A small area plan may say, we don't want to do anything. I mean, that might be an outcome, so.
So do we have agreement on the recommendation for topic number 4, our 4th and final topic?
If it was, as he just said, our chair just said, you do a small area plan for the interchange, just so that it doesn't have stuff, as he said, things are happening. But it needs to be in a coordinated fashion, but I don't want to start enumerating all this stuff that we're gonna try to squish in there, as opposed to saying what's most appropriate for this, if anything. Then I can put my green card.
I think we've done it. Congratulations. So, I don't know who we're handing it to discuss next steps.
Yep, just very quick next steps. Of course, we'll, summarize all of the input from this evening, both the, general consensus, but also where concerns were noted. And get this all together for the board's packet for their September 6th meeting so that they can give us direction on these topics as well. And then we have the 3 upcoming planning commission meetings and rounds of engagement in the fall where we'll share 2 to 3 chapters at a time, the updated goals and objectives for community input. And then phase 3 will be next year, so that's the action steps for each chapter, each plan topic, metrics for implementation, and then big moves, which is prioritizing what we're recommending in the plan for at a high level, what are the big things that should be accomplished in the first 5 years.
So where we've made changes to some of these options here, would you consider either presenting our change language or when you present this board of supervisors, or at least present it as a separate option?
Yeah, we're going to meet and discuss as staff and make sure we've, kind of captured all of the comments, but we are going to look at, sharing a modified option for the board to consider, so they don't have to go with, the exact language that you've all proposed. Where you all, kind of had suggested changes, we'll pass that along as their option to consider.
And Nathan can read it. Nathan can be the person who reads the minutes for this.
Thank you for your vote of support, Julian. I will do my best.
No, I think highly of your capabilities.
Size 36 foot.
Oh, y'all are great. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Feel better.
Feel better.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
You throwing us out of here?
It's time to roll. So, with that, the next planning commission meeting will be held on Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, and thank you to staff for all this work.
Yes, that
It's
was
a huge
great
win.
work. Great work. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Not asking if anyone's changing their mind? We're out of
Change
here.
your mind. You wanna be there? You wanna be there?